Hello everyone, and welcome back to X-Ranger. Before we begin, I thought it would be interesting if each of you could leave a comment indicating which part of the world you're joining us from. Also, don't forget to like and subscribe if you're enjoying the episodes. Now let's get comfortable, relax, and start our program. I've struggled with whether to share this experience for years. It's been 17 years now, and I still question what happened that morning outside Corrigon. I'm not the type who believes in monsters or goes looking for paranormal explanations. I'm just a regular guy who loves hiking and being outdoors. But what I saw that day in October 2006 has stayed with me, clear as if it happened yesterday. It was October 21st, a Saturday. The weather was perfect. Not too hot, not too cold, just that beautiful fall temperature we get in East Texas. I'd been feeling cooped up all week at my office job, so I decided to get some fresh air and exercise by walking an old logging trail I knew about. Nothing fancy, just a few hours in nature to clear my head. I got to the trailhead around 10 in the morning. I remember checking my watch as I stepped out of my truck, 10:15 exactly. Because I was planning to be back by early afternoon. I had my small backpack with some water, trail mix, and my phone, which barely had service out there anyway. The trail was quiet that morning. I'd passed a couple heading back to their car when I first arrived, but after that, I had the place to myself. The leaves were starting to change, and the sunlight was filtering through the trees in that golden way it does in autumn. I wasn't really thinking about anything in particular, just enjoying the sounds of the woods and the crunch of leaves under my boots. I'd been walking for maybe 15 minutes when I came to this bend in the trail. It curved around a small rise, not really a hill, just an elevated part of the ground where the trail dipped down and then back up. As I rounded that bend, I stopped dead in my tracks. About 30 feet ahead of me, standing behind that small rise, was something. Someone. I don't know. At first, my brain tried to make sense of it. Maybe a hunter in a ghillie suit. But no hunter would wear what I was looking at. From where I stood, I could only see it from about mid-chest up. The lower half was hidden behind the rise in the trail, but what I could see was enough to freeze me in place. It was big. Way bigger than any person I'd ever seen. The shoulders had to be at least twice the width of mine, and I'm not a small guy at 6 feet tall. It was covered in hair, not fur, but hair, this reddish-brown color that reminded me of rust mixed with dirt. The hair wasn't uniform, though. On its head, it was shorter, maybe 2 or 3 inches long, but as my eyes moved down, I noticed the hair got progressively longer. The chest and upper body had hair about 5 inches long. It was thinner there, not as dense. But the arms, God, the arms. The hair there hung down a good 8 inches at least, swaying slightly even though there was barely any breeze. Its face is what I remember most clearly. The lower half had this lighter colored hair, almost like a beard, but not exactly. It wasn't gray, just a lighter shade of that same reddish brown. And the eyes, they were dark brown, almost black, set deep under a prominent brow. They were intelligent. That's the only word I can use. Those eyes were studying me, moving up and down my body like it was assessing me, trying to figure out what I was, or if I was a threat. The head wasn't pointy or cone-shaped like you see in some drawings or hoaxes. It was rounded, sitting directly on those massive shoulders with barely any neck visible. The proportions were all wrong for a human, but it had a distinctly humanoid appearance that made it all the more unnerving. We just stood there staring at each other. I don't know how long, maybe 10 seconds, maybe 30. Time sort of stopped. I couldn't move. I couldn't speak. I couldn't even think of running. It was like my brain short-circuited, trying to process something it had no category for. Then it moved. Slowly, deliberately, it backed away. It didn't turn around. It kept facing me as it moved backward and out of my sight behind that rise. What struck me was how silent it was. Something that big should make noise when it moves. But there was nothing. No cracking twigs, no rustling leaves. just silence. Once it disappeared from view, I remained frozen for what felt like forever. My heart was pounding so hard I could feel it in my throat. My mouth had gone completely dry. I had this weird buzzing sensation all over my skin, like static electricity. I don't know what made me move finally. Maybe it was self-preservation kicking in, or maybe it was curiosity, but I took a few tentative steps forward. I had to know if it was real, if I'd really seen what I thought I saw. I approached the rise cautiously, half expecting that thing to pop back up and charge at me. But when I reached the spot where it had been standing, there was nothing there. No footprints that I could discern on the leaf-covered ground, no broken branches, no sign that anything had been there at all. I stood there scanning the woods. The trees weren't particularly dense in that area, so I should have been able to see something that big moving away. But there was nothing. It had vanished. I remember feeling this overwhelming sense of vulnerability, like I was being watched from somewhere I couldn't see. I took out my phone, hoping to call someone, but of course there was no signal. I thought about taking pictures of the area, but what would I be taking pictures of? Empty woods. I had no proof of what I'd seen, and I knew how crazy it would sound. I debated with myself about what to do next. Part of me wanted to continue my hike as planned, to prove to myself that I wasn't afraid. But another part, the rational part, was screaming at me to get the hell out of there. That second part won. I turned around and started walking back to my truck, much faster than I'd come in. I kept looking over my shoulder every few seconds, half expecting to see that thing following me. My mind was racing, trying to make sense of what I'd seen. Could it have been a bear standing on its hind legs? No, the proportions were all wrong, and bears don't move like that. A person in a costume, out here miles from anywhere, with no vehicle that I'd seen at the trailhead, and no costume I've ever seen, looks that realistic up close. The walk back to my truck seemed to take forever, even though I was practically jogging. Every sound in the forest made me jump. A squirrel running up a tree nearly gave me a heart attack. I kept thinking I saw movement in my peripheral vision, but whenever I turned to look, there was nothing there. When I finally reached my truck, I practically dove inside and locked the doors. I sat there for a few minutes, hands shaking on the steering wheel, trying to calm down. I checked my watch. It was only 11:15. The entire encounter and my retreat had taken less than an hour, but it felt like I'd been in those woods for days. As I drove home, I tried to rationalize what I'd seen. Maybe it was the light playing tricks on me. Maybe I was more tired than I thought. Maybe there was a logical explanation that I just wasn't seeing. But deep down, I knew what I'd seen. I'd been face to face with a Sasquatch. I didn't tell anyone at first. How could I? Hey, guess what I saw on my hike today? Bigfoot. I'd sound insane. So I kept it to myself, but I couldn't stop thinking about it. I couldn't stop seeing those eyes studying me, intelligent and aware. Over the next few weeks, I did some research. I looked up Bigfoot sightings in East Texas, particularly around Corrigon. To my surprise, there were quite a few reports from that general area over the years. People describing similar creatures with that same reddish-brown hair, that same silent movement. It made me feel less crazy, knowing others had seen something similar. I went back to that trail about a month later, this time with a friend. I didn't tell him why I wanted to go there specifically, just that I'd found a nice hiking spot. We walked the same path, and I kept my eyes peeled, but there was nothing unusual that day. Just a normal hike in the woods. Part of me was relieved, but another part was almost disappointed. I wanted validation that what I'd seen was real. I've been back to that trail many times since then, in different seasons, different times of day. I've never seen anything like that again. Sometimes I wonder if I imagined the whole thing, if my mind played some elaborate trick on me. But then I remember those eyes, that intelligent gaze, and I know it was real. I don't have any dramatic conclusion to this story, no further encounters, no physical evidence to share. Just a brief moment on a fall morning when my understanding of the world was completely upended. I don't know what that creature was or why it was there. I don't know why it chose to back away rather than approach me or run. I don't know why I was lucky enough or unlucky enough to see it when so many people spend their lives searching and never do. All I know is that something exists in those woods that science hasn't explained. Something intelligent, something aware, something that moves through the forest like a ghost, leaving no trace. And sometimes, on quiet nights when I can't sleep, I still see those eyes watching me, assessing me, like they did on that trail. I wonder if it remembers me too, the human who froze in fear at the sight of something he couldn't explain. I still hike. I still love the outdoors. But I'm more aware now of the shadows between the trees, the silence that sometimes falls in the forest. And I always have the feeling that I'm not alone out there. Story 2. I'm still trying to make sense of what happened to me. I've always been a skeptic, one of those people who needs to see something to believe it. Well, now I've seen something, and I almost wish I hadn't. This all started a few years back when I was hiking with my dog, Rusty, near the Clayton Sand Pit in Lacey Township. I'm pretty familiar with the area since I've lived nearby most of my life. That day, I decided to take this trail that hardly anyone uses. It's nothing special, just a slight incline through some pines and scrub oak. Rusty was doing his usual thing, sniffing around, marking territory, when about 40 yards ahead of us, he suddenly took off into the brush. I called after him, but he was gone in a flash. That wasn't like him at all. He's usually pretty good about staying close. I jogged up the trail to where he'd disappeared and started calling his name. I could hear him rustling around in the underbrush. When I got closer, I caught movement out of the corner of my eye. Something big moving quickly through the dense vegetation. I only saw it for a split second, the back of what looked like a dark, furry head disappearing into thicker brush. My first thought was bear, but we don't really have bears in this part of New Jersey. Rusty came bounding back to me, acting strangely excited but also kind of anxious. I couldn't shake the feeling of what I'd seen, so I went back the next day without Rusty. I got to the same spot and just stood there, listening. After about 10 minutes, I heard something moving in the brush about 35 yards ahead. What caught my attention was this low, rhythmic breathing sound, not like a deer or coyote. The breathing stopped as soon as I took a step forward. I froze and waited. During gusts of wind, I could hear faint footsteps, like something was using the noise cover to move. Then silence again. After about 20 minutes of this weird cat-and-mouse game, I decided to leave. Something about the whole situation felt intelligent, like whatever was there was deliberately hiding from me. I kind of forgot about these incidents until this summer. My family has this property that's been in our name for generations. It's pretty remote, out in the Pine Barrens. As a kid, I never liked staying there, always felt uneasy, like something wasn't right about the place. My parents brushed it off as childhood imagination, but I avoided it as much as possible once I grew up. This year, my siblings organized a family reunion camping trip at the property starting July 2nd. My wife convinced me to go, said it would be good for our kids to connect with their cousins and the family history. I reluctantly agreed. From the moment we arrived, something felt off. We set up our tents in this clearing surrounded by thick forest. My brother brought his trailer, and my sister had this massive tent for her family. We had a smaller 4-person tent for me, my wife, and our 2 kids. The first night was uneventful, but I couldn't sleep. I kept feeling like we were being watched. The second day, everyone was having a good time, but I noticed how the woods would go completely silent at random intervals. No birds, no insects, nothing. Then, after a few minutes, normal forest sounds would resume. Nobody else seemed to notice or care. That night, after everyone went to bed, I sat by the dying campfire just listening. Around 11, I heard what I can only describe as a roar in the distance. Not a bear, not a coyote, something else. My brother-in-law came out of his tent and asked if I'd heard it too. We stayed up another hour but didn't hear it again. The third day is when things got truly unsettling. Throughout the day, we kept hearing strange noises from different directions in the forest. Sometimes it sounded like growls from something large. Other times, there were these whooping sounds, almost like calls. The really freaky part was that they seemed to be responding to each other. One call from the north, then an answer from the east. My nephew, who's 15 and into wildlife, said he'd never heard anything like it. As the sun started setting, the wildlife went completely silent again. We could hear sticks cracking and branches breaking deep in the forest, like something big was moving around us in a circle. My sister suggested it might be deer, but the pattern felt too deliberate. By this point, my wife was getting worried too. That night, I couldn't sleep at all. I moved my air mattress to the center of the tent, away from the walls. My wife and kids were finally asleep around 1 in the morning. I was lying there wide awake, listening to every sound outside. At exactly 1:46, I remember checking my phone, I felt something press against my back through the tent wall. I froze, thinking maybe it was a raccoon or something small. Then I felt something grab my arm, not like an animal paw, but like fingers wrapping around my forearm through the tent fabric. At the same moment, the air mattress started violently shaking. I couldn't move or scream. I was paralyzed with fear. The whole tent was shaking now. My wife woke up and started screaming, which woke the kids. Then, a bright white light shone on the back corner of the tent, illuminating everything inside. It wasn't like a flashlight. It was too intense, too white. The whole thing probably lasted 15 seconds, but it felt like forever. Then it just stopped. The light vanished. The shaking stopped. Whatever was grabbing my arm let go. My family was in complete panic. I grabbed the flashlight and forced myself to look outside the tent, but there was nothing there. No footprints, no signs of anything. What I did notice, though, was that our entire tent had shifted position. It had moved forward about 5 to 7 feet from where we'd staked it down. The stakes were still in the ground in their original spots, but the tent itself had been dragged forward. My wife wanted to wake everyone up, but I convinced her to wait until morning. None of us slept after that. As soon as the sun came up, I started packing our stuff. My brother asked what was wrong, and I just made up some excuse about our youngest not feeling well. I couldn't bring myself to tell everyone what had happened. On the drive home, my arm started feeling sore. When we got back and I jumped in the shower, I noticed these marks on my left forearm, 4 distinct fingerprint-shaped bruises with one opposing bruise, like a thumb. My son took pictures of it with his phone. I still have those photos. I've spent the last few weeks trying to make sense of what happened. Was it someone playing a sick prank? But how would they move our entire tent with us inside it? And what was that light? I keep going back to what I saw in the woods years ago. That dark, furry head disappearing into the brush. The weirdest part is that when I told my dad about it, he got really quiet. Then he told me that's why he stopped taking us camping at the property when we were kids. He'd had his own experiences there, but never told anyone because he didn't want to scare us or sound crazy. I don't know what's out there in those woods. I don't know if it's some unknown animal or something else entirely. All I know is that I'm never going back to that property again, and every time I hear a strange noise outside at night now, my whole body goes cold. The bruises on my arm faded after about a week, but I still have the pictures. Sometimes I look at them just to remind myself that I'm not crazy, that something really did grab me that night, something that shouldn't exist. Story 3. I've been hiking and camping my whole life. Growing up in Northern California, the redwoods have always been my second home. I'm the guy who laughs at bear bells and thinks most wilderness encounters are just people overreacting to normal forest sounds. At least, that's who I was until 3 months ago. My wife Lisa and I have been married for 6 years. She's not as outdoorsy as me, but she's grown to appreciate our weekend hikes. That particular Saturday in early October was perfect, cool but not cold, with that golden autumn light filtering through the trees. We decided to visit Founder's Grove in Humboldt Redwood State Park. If you haven't been there, it's this cathedral-like stand of old-growth redwoods. The trees are absolutely massive, some over 300 feet tall and wider than my car. We arrived around 4 in the afternoon. The parking lot was nearly empty, which wasn't surprising since it was getting late in the day and tourist season was winding down. We had the trail mostly to ourselves, just passing an older couple heading back to their car as we started our walk. "This is why I drag you out here," I said to Lisa as we walked beneath the giants. She smiled and squeezed my hand. The light was incredible. Shafts of amber sunlight cutting through the canopy hundreds of feet above us, illuminating the ferns and sorrel covering the forest floor. We weren't in a hurry, just wandering and appreciating the quiet majesty of the place. We stopped to read the interpretive signs about the fallen Direville giant and other notable trees. As the sun began to set, the forest took on this ethereal quality. The shadows lengthened and the temperature dropped slightly. We decided to head to this small clearing I knew about, just off the main loop trail, where you could watch the sunset through the trees. It's maybe half a mile from the parking area, nothing strenuous. We sat on a fallen log in comfortable silence for a while, just taking it all in. The birds were active as dusk approached. The usual evening chorus of nuthatches, jays and thrushes calling back and forth. I remember thinking how peaceful it was. Then everything changed. It happened so suddenly that at first I thought my ears had popped or something. The forest went completely silent, not gradually quiet, silent. One moment, birds calling, insects buzzing, leaves rustling. The next, absolutely nothing. The silence was so abrupt and total it felt physical, like pressure against my eardrums. Lisa noticed it too. "What happened to the birds?" she whispered, her voice sounding unnaturally loud in the stillness. I shrugged, trying to appear unconcerned, but something felt off. In 20-plus years of wilderness experience, I'd never felt anything like this. The air seemed to thicken, and the hairs on my arms stood up. It wasn't cold, but I shivered. That's when we heard it. A strange chattering sound coming from the trees to our right, maybe 50 yards away. It's hard to describe accurately. Not quite like teeth clicking together, not quite like wood knocking on wood, and definitely not like any animal call I recognized. It had this rhythmic quality to it, almost deliberate sounding, like communication. I glanced at Lisa. Her eyes were wide, fixed on the direction of the sound. The chattering stopped after maybe 10 seconds, and the silence felt even heavier afterward. I don't know what possessed me to do what I did next. Maybe it was curiosity, maybe it was some primal instinct, but I cupped my hands around my mouth and let out a short whoop into the silence. Not loud or aggressive, just a simple whoop. The moment it left my lips, I regretted it. Lisa shot me a, "What the hell?" look. But before she could say anything, something responded. From the same direction as the chattering, but seemingly closer now, came a sound that mirrored mine. A whoop, but deeper, louder, and with this resonance that made my chest vibrate. It wasn't an echo. This was a response. The dread that washed over me in that moment is impossible to fully explain. It was visceral, instinctual. This overwhelming certainty that we were in danger. Every cell in my body screamed at me to run. I've encountered black bears, mountain lions, even a moose once up in Alaska, but I've never felt anything remotely like this bone-deep fear. "We need to go," I whispered to Lisa, barely moving my lips. "Now." She nodded slightly, eyes still fixed on the trees where the sound had come from. We stood up slowly, and I gently took her arm. We were already facing the direction back to the parking lot, thank God, so we didn't have to turn our backs immediately to whatever was out there. As we started walking, not running, but definitely moving with purpose, I heard movement in the underbrush where the sounds had come from. Not small creatures scurrying, but the unmistakable sound of something large pushing through vegetation. Branches snapping, leaves rustling, the distinctive sound of weight pressing down on the forest floor. The chattering started again, but this time it was behind us, following a parallel path through the trees. The sound seemed to be keeping pace with us, always maintaining that same 50-yard distance. We quickened our steps, but still didn't run. Some instinct told me that running would be a mistake. Lisa's hand was squeezing mine so tightly it hurt, but I barely noticed. My heart was pounding so hard I could feel each pulse in my temples. We didn't speak. Somehow, I think we both understood that making human sounds right then was a bad idea. The main trail was only about 100 yards ahead when the chattering abruptly stopped. The silence lasted maybe 5 seconds, and then we heard it. Heavy footsteps, not even trying to be quiet anymore, crashing through the undergrowth. But they weren't coming toward us. Whatever it was moving away, deeper into the forest. The footfalls were heavy, much heavier than a person's would be, and spaced farther apart. Each impact seemed to carry more weight than a human could possibly have. I've heard black bears move through the forest, and this was different. The rhythm was wrong, more bipedal. We reached the main trail and immediately increased our pace to a fast walk, almost jogging. The parking lot was visible now, maybe 200 yards away. Our car sat alone. The older couple had left. We were about halfway to the car when I heard a sound that still haunts me. From deep in the forest, far behind us now, came a long, mournful call. Not quite a howl, not quite a scream, but something in between. It echoed among the massive trunks, seeming to come from everywhere and nowhere at once. It was loud enough that I know anyone within a mile would have heard it clearly. The call had this emotional quality to it that's hard to explain. It sounded almost disappointed, frustrated. Whatever it was, it conveyed intelligence, not just animal instinct. I've never heard anything like it before or since. We practically ran the last 100 yards to the car. I fumbled with the keys, hands shaking so badly I dropped them. Lisa picked them up and unlocked the doors. We jumped in, and I started the engine immediately, flipping on the headlights. The forest edge, where the parking lot met the trees, looked completely normal. Nothing moved, nothing watched. But I couldn't shake the certainty that something was there, just beyond the reach of our headlights, observing us. We drove in silence for several miles, both processing what had happened. Finally, Lisa spoke. "What was that, Michael?" I shook my head. "I don't know." "But you have some idea, don't you?" She knows me too well. I hesitated. I've read about Bigfoot encounters since I was a kid. I found them entertaining, but never took them seriously. I was the first person to roll my eyes at grainy photos and second-hand stories, but sitting there, hands still trembling on the steering wheel, I couldn't dismiss what we'd experienced. "It wasn't a bear," I finally said, "or a mountain lion, or any animal I'm familiar with. It moved like it was on 2 legs. It responded to me intelligently." "You think it was a Bigfoot?" Lisa asked, not mockingly, but with genuine uncertainty. "I think it was something that knew we were there, something that communicated with us, something that wanted us to know it was there." I swallowed hard, and I think it could have caught us if it wanted to. That night, I couldn't sleep. I kept replaying those sounds in my head, the chattering, the whoop response, those heavy footsteps, and that final call that seemed to carry so much meaning. I've spent countless nights in the wilderness, but I've never felt watched like I did in Founder's Grove. I've researched similar encounters since then, the forest going suddenly silent, the feeling of dread, the strange vocalizations. They're all common elements in Bigfoot reports. I never thought I'd be one of those people, yet here I am. We haven't told many people about what happened. Who would believe us? We don't have photos or recordings, just our experience. But I know what we heard. I know what we felt. I've been back to the redwoods since then, but not to Founder's Grove, not yet, maybe someday. But I'll never again dismiss someone's strange wilderness encounter. Something intelligent was in those woods with us that evening. Something that knew we were there and reached out to communicate, something that let us go. I still don't know what to call it. But whatever was watching us from the trees that day changed how I see the forests. I've loved my whole life. They're still beautiful, still majestic. But now I understand they hold secrets I'm not sure we're meant to uncover. Story 4. I've been holding this in for years now, never really sharing it with anyone outside my immediate family. My wife thinks I'm crazy, and I can't blame her. But I know what I saw, and I need to get this off my chest. This happened back in 1998 when I was 26. I was working for a small fencing contractor in eastern Australia, about 50 kilometers inland from the coast. The pay wasn't great, but I enjoyed the work. Being outdoors, physical labor, and the satisfaction of seeing a job well done at the end of the day. This particular job was on a massive property surrounded by thick eucalyptus forest. The owner wanted to fence off about 15 acres where he was planning to build a house eventually. It was remote as hell. The nearest neighbor was probably 5 kilometers away, and the closest town was a good 30-minute drive. My boss, Dave, had another job he was handling on the other side of the region, so I was alone that day. I didn't mind. I had my little portable radio, my packed lunch, and enough fence posts to keep me busy. The morning went by without anything unusual happening. It was hot, probably around 35 degrees, and the flies were absolutely relentless. Classic Australian summer. I remember I was about halfway through setting the posts on the western edge of the property. The forest was particularly dense there, with undergrowth so thick you couldn't see more than a few meters in. The canopy was heavy too, creating this strange half-light even though it was around 1 in the afternoon. I had my shirt off, sweating like crazy, just focused on digging the holes for the posts. That's when I first heard it. Footsteps. Not like an animal moving through brush. These were deliberate bipedal footsteps, heavy ones. At first, I thought maybe the property owner had come to check on the progress, or maybe Dave had finished early and decided to join me. "Hello?" I called out, leaning on my shovel. "Someone there?" Nothing, just those footsteps, slightly slower now, as if whatever was making them had hesitated. Then they continued, moving parallel to where I was working, just inside the tree line. I tried to convince myself it was just a kangaroo. They can sound bipedal sometimes when they're moving slowly, but deep down I knew better. This sounded heavy, deliberate, like a person walking. But why wouldn't they answer? I went back to work, but I kept glancing toward the trees. The footsteps continued, sometimes stopping, sometimes seeming to circle back, but always staying just out of sight in the dense bush. I started to get this cold feeling in my stomach despite the heat. Something felt wrong. After about 15 minutes of this, I was properly on edge. I'd positioned myself so I could keep an eye on the tree line while working. The footsteps had stopped for a few minutes, and I was starting to think whatever it was had moved on. That's when I heard a branch snap about 20 meters to my right. It was much closer now. I spun around, shovel gripped tight in my hands, ready to defend myself if needed. That's when I saw it. About 20 meters away, partially hidden behind a large eucalyptus tree, was something. At first, my brain tried to make sense of it. A person. A really tall, hairy person. But within seconds I knew this wasn't human. It was tall, probably over 2 meters, and covered in thick, reddish-brown hair. Not fur exactly, more like long hair. The build was powerful, but oddly proportioned. Its arms were unnaturally long, hanging almost to its knees. It had a hunched posture, not bent over exactly, but not standing fully upright like a human would. The head was rounded, and the face, God, the face is what still haunts me. It wasn't an ape face like a gorilla or orangutan. It was more human-like, but wrong somehow. The eyes were deep set, and even from that distance, I could feel it watching me with what seemed like intelligence. The nose was flat and wide, and the mouth was a grim line beneath it. We stared at each other for what felt like forever, but was probably only 3 or 4 seconds. I couldn't move, couldn't breathe. My hands were shaking so badly I dropped the shovel. That sound seemed to break whatever moment we were having. The thing moved with shocking speed. 1 second it was standing there, the next it was bolting deeper into the forest. The way it moved was incredible, powerful, agile, weaving between trees and leaping over fallen logs. It covered ground faster than any human could, especially in that dense brush. Within seconds, it had disappeared from view, but I could still hear it crashing through the undergrowth, branches snapping, leaves rustling. Then that sound faded too, and I was left in silence, broken only by my own panicked breathing and the distant call of a kookaburra that seemed bizarrely normal after what I'd just witnessed. I stood there for a long time, just staring at the spot where it had been. Part of me wanted to run to my truck and get the hell out of there. Another part was curious, wanted to go look for footprints or other evidence. In the end, fear won out, not of the creature itself, which had clearly wanted to avoid me, but fear of what I'd discovered, fear that the world wasn't what I thought it was. I kept working. Sounds crazy, I know, but what else was I going to do? I'd left my phone in the truck, which was parked about 100 meters away on the dirt road. I didn't want to leave all the equipment behind, and honestly, I think I was in shock. So I just kept digging holes and setting posts, but I worked faster, constantly scanning the tree line, jumping at every sound. When Dave showed up around 4 in the afternoon to check on my progress, I must have looked like I'd seen a ghost. My hands were still shaking, and I'd barely made any progress since the encounter. "You all right, mate? Look like you've had a scare," he said, popping the top off a beer he'd brought from his cooler. I hesitated. Dave was a no-nonsense kind of guy, salt of the earth, practical, not the type to believe in monsters or whatever the hell I'd just seen. But I needed to tell someone. "I saw something in the woods," I said, trying to keep my voice steady. Something, I don't know what it was, like a really tall, hairy person, but not a person. I expected him to laugh, to make some joke about me being out in the sun too long. Instead, he took a long swig of his beer, his eyes scanning the tree line. "Yowies out here," he said simply. "Yowies?" I'd heard the term before, of course. Aboriginal legends, Australia's version of Bigfoot or the Yeti. But I'd always thought they were just stories. Dave just nodded, finished his beer, and never said another word about it. We packed up for the day shortly after, and the drive back to town was silent. That night I couldn't sleep. I kept replaying the encounter in my head, the way it moved, the intelligence in its eyes, the speed with which it disappeared into the bush. I tried to convince myself it was just a very tall, hairy man, or maybe some undiscovered species of great ape, though I knew there weren't supposed to be any in Australia. The next day, I went back to the site with Dave. I half expected to find the creature waiting for me, but the day passed without incident. I looked for tracks where I'd seen it standing, but the ground was too hard and leaf-covered to show footprints. Still, I couldn't shake the feeling of being watched. Over the next few weeks, I jumped at every sound in the bush. I never worked alone again. I made excuses to Dave about needing help with the heavier posts, and thankfully, he didn't question it. Eventually, we finished the job and moved on to others, farther from that particular stretch of forest. In the years since, I've done a lot of research on yowies. There are hundreds of sightings across Australia, many describing exactly what I saw. The reddish-brown hair, the long arms, the surprisingly human-like face. Some people have reported them being aggressive, but most encounters are like mine, brief sightings before the creature retreats. I've never seen another one, though I've been back in those forests many times since. Sometimes I think maybe I imagined it all, or perhaps it was just a very unusual human hermit living in the bush. But then I remember the inhuman way it moved, the impossible speed and agility. And I know what I saw wasn't human. Dave retired 5 years ago and moved up to Queensland. Before he left, I tried to get him to tell me more about what he knew about yowies out here, but he just shrugged and said, "Some things in the bush better left alone, mate." I still work in construction, though I've moved on from fencing. I'm married now, with 2 kids. My wife knows about my yowie encounter, but thinks it's just a funny story I tell. I stopped trying to convince her years ago, but sometimes, when we're camping or hiking, and the kids run ahead on the trail, I find myself scanning the trees, half afraid, half hoping to catch another glimpse of something that shouldn't exist. And whenever we're in the bush, and a twig snaps or leaves rustle in a way that doesn't sound quite right, I freeze, my heart racing, wondering if it's back. I know what I saw that day. I wasn't drunk, I wasn't on drugs, and I wasn't suffering from heat stroke. It was real. It was there. And the most terrifying thing? It was intelligent. Those eyes knew what I was. It was observing me as much as I was observing it. Whatever it was, yowie, Bigfoot, some unknown species, it's out there in the Australian bush. And I can't help but wonder how many other people have seen it, had their reality shattered like mine was, and chosen to stay quiet rather than face ridicule. I've kept this story mostly to myself for over 20 years, but I know what I saw that day in 1998. And sometimes, late at night when I can't sleep, I wonder if it remembers me too. Story 5. I've been wanting to get this off my chest for over 20 years now. I don't talk about it much anymore because people think I'm either crazy or making it up for attention. But I swear on everything I love, what happened to me in October of 1999 was real. I was 32 at the time, living in San Bernardino with my husband Mark and our 3 kids. Tommy was 7, Sarah was 5, and little Mike had just turned 3. Being a mom to 3 young kids is basically a full-time job with no days off, but Mark had noticed I was getting burned out and insisted I take a day for myself. He'd take the kids to his mom's place, and I could do whatever I wanted. I decided to go hiking at Big Bear. I used to love hiking before the kids came along, and autumn in the mountains is absolutely gorgeous. The leaves were changing colors, the air was crisp, but not too cold. Perfect hiking weather. I packed a small backpack with water, some trail mix, an apple and a sandwich. I wore my trusty hiking boots that had been collecting dust in the garage, jeans, and a light jacket over my t-shirt. I got to the trailhead around 7 in the morning. The parking lot was nearly empty, just 2 other cars. I picked a 4-mile loop trail that was rated moderate. I'd been sedentary for years chasing kids around, but I figured 4 miles wouldn't kill me. The first part of the hike was exactly what I needed. The forest was peaceful, birds were chirping, and I could feel my stress melting away with each step. I kept a steady pace, stopping occasionally to take photos with my little disposable camera. There were usually lots of deer in this area, and I was hoping to snap a few pictures for the kids. But about a mile into the hike, I realized something felt off. I hadn't seen a single deer, which was unusual. There were crows around, but they were eerily quiet, just watching. The whole forest suddenly seemed too still, like everything was holding its breath. I remember getting goosebumps despite not being cold. That's when I spotted it. A dark figure standing beside a large pine tree about 50 yards ahead. At first, I thought it was another hiker wearing dark clothes, but something about the way it was standing seemed strange. It wasn't moving at all, just staring in my direction. "Hello," I called out, giving an awkward little wave. No response. The figure didn't move or wave back. I kept walking, telling myself it was probably just someone resting or maybe a hunter, though I was pretty sure it wasn't hunting season yet. As I got closer, I could make out that it was tall, really tall, and completely black. Still, my brain was trying to make sense of it as something normal. Maybe someone in a dark coat. When I was about 20 feet away, I realized it wasn't a person at all. It was broader than any human I'd ever seen, with what looked like matted dark hair covering its body. Before I could process what I was seeing, it stepped behind the tree. My heart started pounding. I walked past the tree, then turned to look back. But whatever it was had vanished. I stood there for a good minute, scanning the woods, but saw nothing. I convinced myself it must have been a shadow, or maybe a bear, though deep down I knew bears don't stand like that. I continued hiking, but now I was on edge. I kept looking over my shoulder and jumping at every sound. About a mile further along the trail, I stopped to drink some water and eat my apple. The trail had narrowed, with dense forest on both sides and a small clearing up ahead. That's when I heard it. A rustling sound behind me, like something large moving through the underbrush. My first thought was deer, and I turned around hoping to finally spot one. What I saw instead will haunt me for the rest of my life. Standing about 30 feet away was what I can only describe as a massive, hairy thing. It was at least 7 feet tall, with broad shoulders and long arms. Its body was covered in filthy, tangled, dark hair that hung in clumps. But it was the face that made my blood run cold. It had deep-set eyes under a prominent brow ridge, and its unnaturally wide mouth was hanging open in this perverted, almost mocking way. I froze completely. I couldn't scream, couldn't run, couldn't even breathe. We just stared at each other for what felt like forever, but was probably only seconds. Then it made a move. It started slapping the ground with these enormous hands. Hands that looked almost human, but were way too big, with long fingers. Each slap made a loud thudding sound that seemed to vibrate through the ground. Go away, I managed to stammer, my voice barely above a whisper. It responded with this horrible whooping sound, not like an ape, but not like any animal I'd ever heard. It was almost like it was trying to mimic human speech, but couldn't quite manage it. Then the smell hit me. Dear God, the smell. It was like rotting meat mixed with wet dog, and something else I can't even describe. My eyes actually watered from the stench. What happened next is something I'll never forget. The creature dropped down on all fours and started hopping toward me, not running like a dog or gorilla, but actually hopping, pushing off with both hands and feet at once. It moved with surprising speed, covering ground faster than I would have thought possible for something so large. I finally snapped out of my paralysis and stumbled backward, nearly falling. I grabbed a rock from the ground, not even a big one, just the first thing my hand found, and held it up. "Stay back!" I screamed, trying to sound threatening but hearing the terror in my own voice. It paused for a moment, tilting its head slightly as if confused by my reaction. Then it made that whooping sound again, louder this time, and slapped the ground even harder. I dropped the rock and ran. I've never run so fast in my life. I didn't look back, didn't stop to catch my breath, just sprinted down the trail as fast as my legs would carry me. Branches slapped against my face and arms, and I tripped several times but managed to stay upright. I have no idea how far I ran, but eventually I had to slow down. My lungs were burning, and my legs felt like jelly. I risked a glance over my shoulder and saw nothing pursuing me. The trail had widened again, and I could see more open sky. I was gasping for air, my heart pounding so hard I thought it might burst from my chest. As I stood there trying to catch my breath, an older man with a grey beard came around the bend. He was dressed in hiking gear with a walking stick and a serious-looking backpack. "You okay, miss?" he asked, genuine concern in his voice. "You look like you've seen a ghost." I burst into tears. I couldn't help it. Between sobs, I tried to explain what I'd seen, expecting him to think I was crazy or hysterical. Instead, he nodded calmly and handed me a handkerchief. "Sounds like you saw a Sasquatch," he said matter-of-factly, like we were discussing the weather. "Probably a juvenile male, based on your description." "A what?" I asked, wiping my eyes. "Sasquatch, Bigfoot," he clarified. "They're all over these mountains, though most folks never see them. They're usually pretty good at staying hidden." I stared at him, not sure if he was messing with me or if he was just as crazy as I felt. "You don't believe me," I said. "Oh, I believe you," he replied. "Had my own encounter about 2 years back, up near Nicolm Creek. Was hiking with my niece, when we saw one eating frogs right out of the creek, just scooping them up and popping them in its mouth. Strangest thing I ever saw. He described his encounter in such a normal, conversational tone that I almost started to feel like maybe I wasn't losing my mind after all. What should I do?" I asked. "Nothing much to do," he shrugged. "They're not usually aggressive unless provoked. Sounds like you just startled each other. You heading back to the parking lot? I'll walk with you if you'd like." I nodded gratefully, and we walked the rest of the way together. He introduced himself as Bill and told me he'd been hiking these mountains for over 40 years. He shared a few more stories of strange things he'd seen in the wilderness, not just Bigfoot, but other unexplainable phenomena. By the time we reached the parking lot, I'd calmed down considerably, though I still felt shaky and disoriented. Bill wrote down his phone number on a scrap of paper and told me to call if I ever wanted to talk about my experience. "Most people won't understand," he said. "They need to see it to believe it, but once you've seen one, you know they're real." I thanked him and got in my car. I sat there for a while, trying to process what had happened. My hands were still trembling as I started the engine. I drove home in a daze. When Mark and the kids got back that evening, I didn't know what to tell them. Mark noticed something was wrong right away and asked about my hike. I tried to explain what happened, but I could see the disbelief in his eyes. He didn't say I was lying, but he suggested maybe I'd seen a bear and my mind had played tricks on me due to exhaustion or dehydration. The kids, on the other hand, believed me instantly. Tommy wanted to know every detail, and Sarah asked if the forest monster was nice or mean. Little Mike just wanted to know if it had sharp teeth. I didn't tell them how terrified I'd been, or about the creature hopping toward me. I just said I saw something strange in the woods that some people call Bigfoot. I never called Bill. I never went back to that trail. For weeks afterward, I had nightmares about that wide, hanging mouth and those deep-set eyes staring at me. The whooping sound would jolt me awake in the middle of the night. Over time, I stopped talking about it. Mark would give me this look whenever I brought it up, and friends would exchange glances when they thought I wasn't looking. So I buried it deep, tried to convince myself it was just a bizarre encounter with some unknown animal, maybe a bear with mange or something. But I know what I saw. 20+ years later, I can still smell that stench if I think about it too hard. I can still hear that whooping sound and the heavy slap of those massive hands against the forest floor. Sometimes I wonder if it's still out there, slapping the ground and making those sounds, watching hikers from behind trees. And sometimes when I can't sleep at night, I wonder if it remembers me too. Story 6. I still get goosebumps thinking about what happened that night on Cameron Pass. It was early fall of 2017, probably around mid-September. The aspens were just starting to turn golden, but it wasn't cold enough yet for snow. I was 17 at the time, and like most teenagers, I'd gotten myself into trouble. My sister Emily and her husband Mark had to come pick me up from this girl's house in Fort Collins because I'd snuck out to see her after my parents had grounded me. I was already in deep shit with my folks, and now I had to endure the hour-long lecture from Emily about responsibility all the way back to our place in Walden. After we dropped Kayla, my date, off at her house, we headed west on Highway 14, which cuts through the Medicine Bow Mountains at Cameron Pass. If you've never driven it, it's this winding mountain road that climbs up to about 10,000 feet before dropping down into North Park. During the day, it's gorgeous. At night, it's just dark as hell with these sharp drop-offs that make you pray your brakes don't fail. It was around 12:30 in the morning when we reached the summit. I remember checking the time on my phone and seeing I had no service, thinking how screwed I was going to be when we got home. I wasn't really paying attention to the road until Mark mentioned something weird. Nobody's up here tonight," he said. I looked up and noticed the turnout at the summit was completely empty. If you know that area, there's almost always a car or two parked there. Either hikers who got a late start, people camping, or sometimes couples looking for privacy. But that night, nothing. just empty pavement lit up by our headlights. Emily was still giving me grief about responsibility and how my parents trusted me, but I'd stopped listening. Something about the emptiness felt off to me. I've grown up in these mountains my whole life. My dad took me hunting since I was 8, and I'd spent countless weekends camping in the backcountry. The mountains have a certain feel to them, and something didn't feel right. We started heading down the west side of the pass, maybe 100 yards or so from the summit, when Mark suddenly slowed the truck. "What's that guy doing?" he said, leaning forward over the steering wheel. I looked up and saw what I thought was a person crossing the road ahead of us. We were on a slight curve, and our headlights were sweeping across the pavement as we turned. At first, I just assumed it was a hiker, maybe heading to their car that was parked somewhere I couldn't see. But as we got closer, that's when I felt this cold sensation wash over me. Something was very wrong with what I was seeing. This wasn't a person. Mark slowed the truck to maybe 15 miles per hour as we approached. The figure was on the left side of the road now, having crossed from right to left. It was massive. I mean, I'm not small. I'm 6 foot and played linebacker on my high school team. But this thing would have made me look like a child standing next to it. It had to be 7 or 8 feet tall, minimum. But it wasn't just the height that was shocking. Its shoulders were incredibly broad, like a bodybuilder on steroids, but proportioned weirdly, and it was covered, completely covered, in what looked like thick, dark hair or fur. "What the hell is that?" Emily whispered. Her lecture was forgotten now. The thing was walking on 2 legs, completely upright, but there was something off about its gait. Fluid, but wrong. Its arms were way too long, hanging down almost to its knees. It wasn't running or even moving particularly fast. Just this deliberate, unhurried walk across the road and up toward the tree line. Mark slowed the truck even more as we got closer. I remember how quiet it got in the cab, just the sound of the engine and our breathing. None of us wanted to say what we were thinking. As we pulled alongside it, Mark did something I still can't believe. He rolled down his window and shouted, "Hey, get off the road!" My heart nearly stopped. I wanted to smack him, to tell him to roll up the window and floor it. But I was frozen, just staring. The thing didn't startle or run like an animal would. It just turned its head slightly toward us. I couldn't make out features. It was too dark, and its face was shadowed. But I felt it looking at us, looking at me. Then it just turned away and continued walking up into the trees like we weren't even there. Jesus Christ, did you see that? Emily's voice was shaking. What was that? Mark tried to play it cool, but I could see his knuckles were white on the steering wheel. Probably just someone in a costume, he said, but his voice cracked a little. Maybe a prank or something. A costume? Out here? I finally found my voice. There's no cars parked anywhere. We're miles from any trailhead. Who the hell would be out here in a costume at 12:30 in the morning? None of it made sense. I've spent my entire life in these mountains. I know what bears look like, even standing up. I know what moose look like in the dark, how elk move, what mountain lions do. This wasn't any of those. This was something else entirely. Mark sped up, and we continued down the pass in silence for a few minutes. Then Emily started trying to rationalize it. Maybe it was a hiker with a big backpack. Maybe it was someone playing a joke. Maybe we just didn't see properly in the dark. But I knew what I saw, and I know what I felt. Growing up hunting, you develop this sense about the woods and the animals in them. You learn to recognize the difference between a branch snapping because of the wind and one breaking under an animal's weight. You know when something's watching you, even if you can't see it. What I felt when that thing looked at us wasn't animal and wasn't human. It was aware in a way that made my skin crawl. There was intelligence there, but not like us. More like it was assessing, deciding we weren't worth bothering with. We made it home around 1:30 in the morning. My parents were waiting up, furious about me sneaking out. Emily and Mark didn't mention what we'd seen. I guess they figured I was in enough trouble already. Later, when I asked Emily about it, She brushed it off, said it was probably just a guy in a ghillie suit or something. Mark avoided talking about it entirely, but I couldn't let it go. The next day, I started researching online. I looked up reports of Sasquatch or Bigfoot sightings in Colorado. There were more than I expected, especially in the more remote mountain areas. Some of the descriptions matched almost exactly what we'd seen. The height, the broad shoulders, the long arms, the deliberate way it moved. I found a local forum where people shared their experiences, and some of the stories sent chills down my spine. One guy described driving through North Park late at night and seeing something similar cross the road in front of him. A woman wrote about camping near Cameron Pass and hearing bipedal footsteps circling her tent for hours. Another hiker found footprints in mud near a stream that were 18 inches long. I've never told my parents about what happened. What would I say? Hey, by the way, we saw Bigfoot on the way home from me being grounded. They'd think I was trying to distract from the trouble I was in. For a while, I tried to convince myself it was just a bear or some other animal that looked weird in the headlights. But I know bears. I've seen dozens of them in the wild. This wasn't a bear. It's been 6 years now, and I still think about that night whenever I drive over Cameron Pass. I'm in college now, studying wildlife biology, partly because of what happened. I keep hoping I'll learn something that will explain what we saw. The thing that still bothers me most isn't just that we saw something unexplainable. It's how it reacted to us, or didn't react. It wasn't scared. It wasn't aggressive. It just acknowledged our presence and continued on its way like we were completely irrelevant to its world. Since that night, I've gone hiking and camping in those mountains dozens of times. I still love the outdoors, but something changed for me. I'm more cautious now. I pay attention differently. I listen more carefully to the sounds around me. I'm always aware that the wilderness might hold things we don't understand and can't explain. Sometimes when I'm alone in the woods, I get this feeling like I'm being watched. The hair on the back of my neck stands up, and I get that same cold sensation I felt that night. It's probably just my imagination, my brain replaying that memory and putting me on alert. But sometimes I wonder if that thing is out there watching me, if it recognizes me from that night on the pass, if it's curious about the human who saw it and lived to tell the tale. I don't talk about this much. Most people would think I'm crazy or making it up for attention, but I know what I saw. Mark and Emily saw it too, even if they don't want to admit it now. Something crossed that road that night that shouldn't exist according to science. Something that makes me question everything I thought I knew about the world around me. Every time I drive that pass now, especially at night, I slow down at that exact spot. I scan the trees and the road ahead. Part of me hopes I never see it again, but another part of me, the part that chose to study wildlife, hopes for just one more glimpse, one more chance to understand what it was that we encountered on Cameron Pass that night. Because whatever it was, it's still out there, and it knows we're here too. Story 7. I've never really shared this story with many people outside my family. It happened back in the summer of '84, when I was just 11 years old. My brothers Tom, 9, and Kevin, 13, and I were staying at our grandmother's farm near the Kitwanga Indian Reserve in BC for a couple weeks. Our cousins Jesse and Mark were there too. The place was pretty isolated, just off the highway between Kitwanga and Kitwangkul, surrounded by thick forest and backing up against this huge wilderness area. Grandma's place wasn't what city folks would call a farm, not with neat rows of corn or anything. It was more like a homestead with a small garden, some geese, and a smokehouse where she'd prepare salmon and game. The house was this old 2-story wooden place that creaked when the wind blew. My dad was helping Grandma fix the roof that summer. It was this crazy hot July afternoon, maybe around 4 or 5 o'clock. The kind of heat where the air doesn't move and everything seems extra quiet. We were playing keep away with this stick we found. Nothing special, just something to do. Our dogs, Rex and Buddy, were running around with us, trying to grab the stick whenever we dropped it. Rex was this big German shepherd mix, really protective, and Buddy was smaller, some kind of terrier that barked at everything. We were laughing and running around in the cleared area between the house and the edge of the property where it sloped down toward this beaver pond. I remember being hot and sweaty, my t-shirt sticking to my back. Kevin had just thrown the stick to Jesse when we heard this crazy commotion from down by the pond. All the geese came charging up the slope, wings spread out, honking like mad. I'd seen those geese get upset before when foxes came around, but this was different. They were absolutely terrified, running straight for the house without even looking back. Then something even weirder happened. Rex and Buddy both stopped dead, ears perked up for maybe 2 seconds, and then bolted under the porch without making a single sound. Not one bark. Nothing. I still remember looking at Kevin and seeing his face change. Those dogs weren't afraid of anything. Rex had chased off a black bear the previous summer, barking his head off the whole time, but now they were hiding, completely silent. "What's wrong with them?" Tom asked. And I was about to answer when I noticed Jesse staring toward the smokehouse down near the tree line. He raised his arm slowly and pointed. "Look," he whispered. At first I didn't see anything besides the old smokehouse with its weathered wood siding and metal door. Then I noticed movement in the bushes beside it. Something was there, partially hidden by the foliage, but definitely moving. Then it stepped forward slightly, and I felt this weird sensation like my brain couldn't process what my eyes were seeing. Standing there was this, I don't even know how to describe it properly. It was massive, taller than the smokehouse door by at least a foot, which would put it around 7 feet tall. But it wasn't just tall, it was wide. Shoulders like a linebacker, but proportional to that height. It was covered in dark brown hair or fur that looked matted in some places. The thing that really got me was how it moved. Not like an animal exactly, but not quite like a human either. More deliberate, careful, like it was thinking about each movement. We all froze. I mean completely still. I don't think any of us even breathed. The creature was just standing there, partially obscured by the bushes, but clearly watching us. The weird part was that it didn't seem aggressive. It was just observing, like it was as curious about us as we were terrified of it. I felt Mark grab my arm, his fingers digging in. "Michael," he whispered, "what is that thing?" Before I could answer, the screen door slammed behind us. My dad and Grandma had come out onto the porch. Dad took one look toward where we were all staring, and his face went pale. "All of you, inside, now." His voice was dead calm, but had this edge I'd never heard before. "But Dad," Kevin started. "Now!" Dad barked, and we all scrambled toward the house. I remember glancing back once as I reached the steps. The creature had shifted position slightly, moving a bit more into the open as if trying to get a better look at the commotion. Inside, Grandma was already heading to the kitchen like nothing unusual was happening. Dad closed all the curtains and checked that the doors were locked. We kids huddled in the living room, talking in whispers. "Did you see how big it was?" Jesse kept saying. "What was it?" Tom asked, his voice shaking a little. I finally worked up the courage to follow Grandma into the kitchen. She was calmly making tea, her weathered hands steady as she put the kettle on the old gas stove. "Grandma," I said, my voice cracking a bit, "what was that thing out there?" She looked at me with these calm, deep brown eyes. "That's a Sasquatch," she said matter-of-factly, as if I'd asked her about a deer or a raccoon. Then she went back to getting cups down from the cabinet. I stood there, stunned. Not just by what she'd said, but by how she'd said it. Like this was just something that happened sometimes. No big deal. Not once did she question what we'd seen or act surprised. "You've seen them before?" I managed to ask. She nodded, measuring tea leaves into the pot. "They come around sometimes. They're curious, but they don't usually bother anyone if you leave them be." I had about 1,000 questions, but right then, Dad came into the kitchen and told me to go join the others. The rest of the evening was weird. Dad kept looking out the windows, and Grandma acted like it was just another day. We kids whispered theories to each other, but eventually got distracted by a board game and dinner. That night, I barely slept. Every crack and groan of the old house had me sitting up in bed. I kept thinking about how the creature had just stood there, watching us. Not threatening, just curious. And I couldn't stop thinking about Grandma's reaction. Like seeing a Sasquatch was as normal as seeing a moose or a bear. The next morning, the first thing we all wanted to do was go look for footprints. Dad reluctantly agreed to go with us, but warned us not to get our hopes up. "The ground's been bone dry for weeks," he said. "Might not be anything to find." He was right. The summer had been hot and dry, and the earth around the smokehouse was hard-packed. We found some broken branches and disturbed undergrowth, but nothing you could definitively call evidence. No clear footprints, no hair caught on branches that we could find. Dad seemed relieved, but I noticed he kept scanning the tree line the whole time we were out there. The dogs eventually came out from under the porch, but stayed close to the house, which wasn't like them at all. Later that day, I overheard Dad and Grandma talking on the porch. I was supposed to be getting something from the woodshed, but I stopped when I heard them mention what happened. "You shouldn't fill the kids' heads with those old stories, Mom," Dad said, sounding frustrated. "It's not stories, Joseph," Grandma replied firmly. "You saw it yourself, same as your grandfather saw them and his father before him." "Could have been a bear standing up," Dad muttered, but he didn't sound convinced. "A bear doesn't stand 7 feet tall with shoulders like that. You know what you saw." Dad was quiet for a long time before he said, "I just don't want the kids scared of being in the woods." Grandma chuckled. "They should have a healthy respect for what's in these forests. There are things out there older than our understanding." That afternoon, Grandma took me with her to deliver some preserved food to a friend in the village. While there, I heard elders talking about similar sightings over the years. One old woman from Hazelton told a story that made my skin crawl. She believed her niece had been taken by a Sasquatch nearly 40 years earlier. The girl had gone out berry picking alone and never returned. They found a single shoe and tracks too large to be human leading deep into the forest. For the rest of that summer visit, we never saw the creature again. But things had changed. I noticed how the adults would scan the tree line before letting us play outside, how conversations would stop when we kids walked into the room, the way Grandma would leave small offerings of food near the edge of the woods some evenings. That experience changed how I saw the wilderness around Grandma's farm. The forest wasn't just trees and animals anymore. It held secrets, things that existed whether people acknowledged them or not. I'm 38 now, and I've never seen anything like that creature again. Grandma's farm buildings are gone. The property was sold after she passed when I was in college. But I've gone back to the area a few times as an adult. That beaver pond is still there, and the forests around it remain largely untouched. Sometimes I think about that creature, wondering if it's still out there. What was it doing near the farm that day? Was it just passing through, or did it live nearby? Did it have a family? Grandma seemed to know more than she told us, taking the fullness of her knowledge to the grave. The skeptical part of me has tried to rationalize what we saw. Maybe it was just a bear. Maybe our young imaginations exaggerated its size and features. But then I remember how those normally aggressive farm dogs hid in absolute silence, how the geese panicked, how my father's face drained of color when he saw what we were looking at, and most of all, I remember Grandma's calm acceptance, as if Sasquatches were just another part of the natural world that modern people had forgotten how to see. To this day, when I'm hiking in remote areas, I sometimes get this prickling sensation on the back of my neck, and I wonder, am I being watched with that same curious, intelligent gaze I felt that summer day in '84? Story 8. I still get chills thinking about that day, even though it's been over 5 years now. November 2018. I was 14 then, just a kid really. But what we saw in those woods near Forest, Mississippi, man, it changed everything I thought I knew about the world. It was one of those cold, grey November afternoons, the kind where the clouds hang so low you feel like you could reach up and touch them. Me, my two brothers, Jake was 16 and Micah was 12, and our friends Tyler and Damon decided to go collect mistletoe. Sounds stupid now, but my mom wanted some for Christmas decorations, and we thought it'd be fun to get out of the house for a bit. We headed out around 3 in the afternoon. I remember checking my phone before we left. It was 3:27 exactly. The weather was cold enough that we could see our breath, and we were all bundled up in hoodies and jackets. The woods near our place had already been picked clean of mistletoe, so we decided to try a spot about a mile from our house that none of us had really explored before. The main trail was easy enough to follow, just a well-worn path that hunters and local kids used. But after walking for maybe 10 minutes, Jake spotted this old logging road branching off to the right. It was grown over pretty bad, but you could still tell it used to be a road. He said it might lead to some good trees, so we turned off the main path. I remember feeling a weird sense of unease as soon as we left the main trail. It was quieter somehow. You know how woods usually have all these little sounds, birds, squirrels, leaves rustling? There wasn't much of that. Just the sound of our shoes on the fallen leaves and our own voices, which seemed way too loud all of a sudden. We followed that old logging road for about 300 yards. It wasn't that far, but it felt like we were getting deeper and deeper into a part of the forest that people didn't visit much. The trees were older, taller, and the undergrowth was thicker. I remember Tyler saying something like, "Man, this place is creepy," and we all laughed it off, but I think we all felt it. Then we came to this fork in the logging road. Jake wanted to go right, but Micah insisted there were better trees to the left. We argued for a minute before deciding to go left. Now I think about how different things might have been if we'd gone right instead. We'd only walked another 40 or 50 yards down this narrower part of the road when we all stopped dead in our tracks. There was a bull standing right in the middle of the path about 20 yards ahead of us. Not just any bull, this thing was massive, dark brown, probably weighed over 1,000 pounds. At first, I was just worried about the bull itself. Growing up in rural Mississippi, you learn pretty quick that bulls can be dangerous, especially if they feel cornered or threatened. "Nobody move," Jake whispered. "Let's just back up slowly." But then I noticed something weird. The bull wasn't looking at us. It was completely focused on something off to the left side of the road. Its head was turned, and it was staring so intently that it barely seemed to register our presence. Naturally, we all looked to see what had the bull's attention. That's when I saw it. And 5 years later, I can still see it perfectly in my mind. About 20 feet off the road, partially hidden between a massive oak tree and some undergrowth, was something. At first, my brain couldn't make sense of what I was seeing. It looked like a patch of light brown fur, but then I realized it was moving slightly, standing, watching. As my eyes adjusted and my brain caught up, I realized I was looking at a figure, a massive figure covered head to toe in light brown hair or fur. It was standing upright on 2 legs, like a person. But no person is that big. This thing had to be at least 8 feet tall. Its shoulders were incredibly broad, like twice as wide as my dad's, and he's a big guy. The fur or hair wasn't super long, but it covered every inch of its body that I could see. I couldn't make out a face clearly, just a darker area where a face should be, but I swear I could feel it watching us for what felt like forever, but was probably just a few seconds. Nobody moved. Not us, not the bull, not the creature. It was like time stopped. The woods were dead silent. I couldn't even hear anyone breathing, though my own heart was pounding so loud in my ears I thought everyone must hear it. Then Tyler, always the loudmouth, broke the silence. "Bigfoot!" he yelled, half in fear and half in disbelief. I expected the creature to react, to run away or maybe charge at us, but it didn't. It just stood there, completely still, like it was deciding what to do. That was almost scarier than if it had moved. The bull snorted and pawed at the ground nervously, but still didn't take its eyes off the creature. I felt Micah's hand grab the back of my jacket. His voice was tiny when he whispered, "Gage, what is that?" I couldn't answer. My mouth had gone completely dry. Jake was the oldest, usually the one in charge, but even he seemed frozen. I glanced at his face and saw something I'd never seen before. Pure fear. His eyes were wide, and his face had gone pale. That's when the panic hit me. If Jake was scared, we were in real trouble. I don't know who moved first. Maybe it was Damon, or maybe it was me. But suddenly we were all running, not back the way we came, but straight south through the woods. We just bolted off the logging road and crashed through the underbrush, trying to get to the main trail as fast as possible. I remember branches whipping my face, thorns catching on my clothes. I tripped over a root and fell hard, scraping my hands and knees, but I was up again in a second. The fear of that thing being behind us was way stronger than any pain. None of us looked back. Not once. We just ran like our lives depended on it, and in that moment, I truly believed they did. We didn't stop running until we hit the main trail, and even then, we kept going at a jog until we were within sight of the highway. Only then did we finally stop, all of us bent over, hands on knees, gasping for breath. What the hell was that? Tyler panted, his face bright red from exertion and fear. Nobody answered right away. We were all still trying to process what we'd seen. "It was a bear," Damon said finally, but his voice lacked conviction. "Had to be." "Bears don't stand like that," Jake said. "That wasn't any bear." "It was a Bigfoot," Micah said, his voice shaking. "Like an actual Sasquatch." I remember looking at my little brother and feeling this overwhelming need to protect him, to tell him it wasn't real, that we'd just seen a bear or maybe even a person in some kind of ghillie suit. But I couldn't lie, not about what I'd just seen with my own eyes. "Yeah," I said quietly. "I think it was." We made a pact right there on the spot not to tell our parents. We knew they wouldn't believe us. They'd think we were making it up or had gotten spooked by a bear or a deer. Plus, I was worried they'd forbid us from going into the woods again, and despite what we'd just seen, the woods were our playground. But we told a few friends at school the next day. Big mistake. Word got around, and suddenly we were the crazy kids who claimed they saw Bigfoot. The teasing wasn't too bad for me and my brothers. Our dad was known around town as a tough ex-military guy who now worked in law enforcement. So people didn't mess with us too much. But Tyler and Damon got it worse. After a week or so, they started saying it probably was just a bear, just to get people off their backs. But the four of us knew what we saw. In the 5 years since, I've spent countless hours researching Bigfoot sightings, reading about encounters all over the country. So many of them describe exactly what we saw: the height, the posture, the fur, the stillness. I've learned that Mississippi actually has a long history of Bigfoot sightings, though most people don't know that. I've only told a few people the full story since then. Most just give me that look, you know the one, like they're trying to decide if I'm crazy or just a really committed liar. But a few believe me, usually hunters or people who've spent a lot of time in the deep woods. They've felt something watching them. They know there are things out there we can't explain. I've never gone back to that specific spot in the woods. None of us have. Jake says he would if I wanted to, but I can tell he doesn't want to either. Even though my dad taught us to shoot when we were young, and I could easily borrow one of his guns now that I'm older, there's no way I'm going back there, even armed. That day changed me. I used to think I knew what was real and what wasn't. I used to think the world was explainable. Now I know better. There are things out there, living alongside us, that most people will never see and wouldn't believe if they did. Sometimes I wonder what would have happened if we hadn't run. What if we'd stayed still or tried to communicate somehow? Would it have approached us, attacked us, or just melted back into the forest like it was never there? I'll never know, but I do know what I saw. It wasn't a man in a suit. It wasn't a bear. It wasn't my imagination. It was a Bigfoot. And the craziest part? For those few seconds when our eyes met, And I swear they did, even though I couldn't clearly see its face. I felt like it knew exactly what I was too, like it was studying me as much as I was studying it. That's the part that still gives me nightmares sometimes. Not just that these creatures exist, but that they're intelligent. Watching, waiting, and usually staying hidden, except for those rare moments when our worlds briefly overlap. I'm 19 now, and I still live in Mississippi, though not in the same town. I've had people suggest hypnosis to recover more details of the encounter, but I'm not sure I want to remember more than I already do. Some things are better left alone, but I know what I saw, and no matter how many people don't believe me, no matter how many scientific explanations are offered, nothing will ever convince me that what stood watching us from beside that tree on that cold November afternoon was anything other than a Bigfoot. And somewhere in those woods, I believe it's still there, watching, waiting, living its life parallel to ours, mostly unseen, but undeniably real. Story 9. I've been an outdoorsman my entire life. Born and raised in northern Minnesota, I've spent more time in the woods than most people spend in shopping malls, hunting, fishing, camping, you name it. The forest is my second home. I know the sounds, the smells, the way light filters through the trees in different seasons. I know animal behavior patterns like the back of my hand, which is why what happened to me last September is so damn unsettling. I can't explain it away, and believe me, I've tried. For context, I'm not some guy who goes looking for the paranormal. Quite the opposite. I've always been the first to roll my eyes at those Finding Bigfoot shows. Whenever I'd hear stories about Sasquatch sightings, I'd think, that's just a bear someone saw in bad lighting, or that guy had too many beers around the campfire. I was the skeptic in my friend group, the rational one. That all changed on September 27th last year. It was one of those perfect fall days in northern Minnesota. Temperature in the mid-60s, clear sky, just a hint of crispness in the air. The kind of day that pulls you outdoors. I decided to take my ATV out on some old logging roads about 10 miles from my place. I knew that network of trails like the back of my hand, had been riding them for years. I headed out around 3 in the afternoon. The forest was showing the first hints of fall color, mostly still green, but with splashes of yellow and orange starting to appear. The dirt and gravel paths were in good condition after a relatively dry month. I remember thinking it was perfect riding weather as I navigated the familiar twists and turns of the logging roads. Around 5 o'clock, I was deep in the woods, probably 6 or 7 miles from the nearest paved road. There was still plenty of daylight left, at least a good 2 hours before sunset. I remember checking my watch because I was thinking about how much longer I wanted to stay out. I was cruising along at maybe 20 miles per hour on a straight stretch of road when I came around a gentle bend where the trees opened up a bit on both sides. Not quite a clearing, but less dense than the surrounding forest. That's when I saw it. About 50 yards ahead, something was walking along the tree line on the left side of the road. My first thought was, bear. But even in that split second, something felt off. It was walking upright, which bears do sometimes, but there was something about the way it moved that didn't register as bear-like to my brain. I instinctively slowed the ATV, easing off the throttle rather than braking hard. The engine was still running, but I was barely moving forward as I tried to process what I was seeing. This thing, and I still hesitate to put a name to it, stepped out onto the road. It crossed the 15-foot width in just a couple of strides. That's when I got my clearest look at it, and that's when I knew I wasn't looking at a bear or any other animal I recognized. It was tall. I'd estimate at least 7 feet, maybe closer to 8. Its body was covered in thick, dark brown hair or fur that looked matted in places. Not uniform like a bear's coat, more uneven, longer in some spots, especially around the shoulders. But the proportions were all wrong for a bear. The arms were incredibly long, hanging down almost to the knees, and the legs were longer and more human-like than a bear's stocky limbs. I killed the engine, Total silence fell except for the sound of birds and the light breeze through the trees. The creature was now on the right side of the road, partially obscured by the first line of trees, about 40 yards away from me. Then it did something that still gives me chills when I think about it. It turned and looked directly at me. Bears will look at you. They'll assess you as a threat or non-threat, but there's always something animalistic and instinctual about it. This was different. It felt deliberate, intelligent, like it was studying me as much as I was studying it. Its face was dark, partially hidden by the hair, but I could clearly see eyes that seemed to be set deep under a prominent brow ridge. I couldn't make out details at that distance, but the impression I got was of a face that was somehow both ape-like and human-like at the same time. We just stared at each other for what was probably only 10 or 15 seconds, but felt like an eternity. I was frozen, not out of fear exactly, but from pure shock. My brain was desperately trying to categorize what I was seeing into something familiar and failing. Then, without any warning or noise, it simply turned and moved into the forest. That's another thing that struck me, how silently it moved. Anyone who's spent time in the woods knows that even deer, which are pretty quiet, make some noise moving through underbrush. Bears crash through like bulldozers. This thing just disappeared. No cracking branches, no rustling leaves, just gone. I sat there on my ATV for probably 5 minutes, not moving. My heart was pounding in my chest. I kept expecting it to come back, or to hear it moving in the woods, but there was nothing. Finally, I started up the ATV again and slowly approached the spot where it had crossed the road. I stopped and got off, scanning the ground. The soil was pretty hard packed on the road itself, but I did find what looked like a partial footprint at the edge of the road where it had stepped into the softer dirt. It was big, easily 15 inches long, and showed what appeared to be 5 toes. It wasn't a clear print by any means, just a depression with some toe marks, but it definitely wasn't a bear track. I've tracked bears for hunting. I know what their prints look like. This wasn't that. I debated following it into the woods, but decided against it. Whatever I'd just seen, I wasn't equipped to track it, and honestly, I wasn't sure I wanted to find it again. Instead, I got back on my ATV and headed home, faster than I'd normally ride those roads. The whole way back, I kept replaying the encounter in my mind. Had I really seen what I thought I saw? Was there any way it could have been a bear, a person in some kind of costume? But I knew better. The way it moved, smooth, confident, bipedal, but not in the awkward way bears walk on their hind legs, wasn't something that could be easily mimicked, and who would be out there in a costume miles from anywhere? It made no sense. When I got home, I didn't tell anyone at first. Not my wife, not my friends. I was worried they'd think I was crazy or that I'd been drinking. I hadn't. Plus, I'd been the guy making fun of Bigfoot believers for years. How could I suddenly come out and say I'd seen one? But after a week of it eating at me, I finally told my brother Tom. We were out in my garage working on his truck, and it just came out. I expected him to laugh, but he got real quiet. Then he told me something that made the hair on my neck stand up. "You're not the first person around here to see something like that," he said. "Remember Bill Johnson, who has that cabin up by Eagle Lake? He saw something similar last hunting season. Wouldn't talk about it to most people because he didn't want the ridicule." Tom went on to tell me about 3 other people in our extended circle who had experiences they couldn't explain, all within about a 30-mile radius of where I'd had my encounter. None of them publicized their stories. They just quietly stopped doubting other people's experiences. That was 8 months ago. I've been back to those logging roads many times since, partly hoping to see it again, partly dreading the possibility. I've never spotted it again, but sometimes, when I'm out there alone, I get the feeling I'm being watched. Not in a threatening way, just observed. I've started doing research, reading accounts from other people who've had similar experiences. There are patterns, Details that match what I saw that aren't commonly featured in popular culture depictions of Bigfoot. The way it moved silently, the intelligent look in its eyes, how it seemed to deliberately avoid leaving evidence. I don't know what to call what I saw that day. Sasquatch, Bigfoot, an undiscovered primate. The label doesn't really matter. What matters is that it was real, and it fundamentally changed my perspective. I think about how arrogant I was before, dismissing other people's experiences because they didn't fit into my understanding of the world. Now I wonder what else might be out there that we don't fully understand. What other things have people been ridiculed for reporting that might actually be real? I still haven't told many people. My wife knows, a couple close friends. I'm not interested in becoming that Bigfoot guy in our community. I don't have photos or concrete proof, just what I saw with my own eyes and what I know in my gut. But I know what I saw crossing that logging road wasn't a bear, wasn't a person, wasn't anything conventionally recognized by science. And every time I'm in those woods now, I look at the spaces between the trees differently, wondering if something is looking back. Story 10. I've been hesitating to write this for nearly 25 years now. I'm not the type to seek attention or make up stories. Anyone who knows me will tell you I'm about as straightforward as they come. I've spent most of my life in the outdoors, hunting, fishing, camping, you name it. I know what bears look like. I know how they move. What I saw that morning wasn't a bear. It was September 14th, 1999. The date is burned into my memory. I was out looking for firewood just off the Hope-Princeton Highway near Nicolm Creek, about 6 miles east of Hope, British Columbia. It was a crisp fall morning, around 8:45, and I'd driven out early to beat any weekend campers to the good deadfall. I had my old Ford pickup and a thermos of coffee, planning to spend a few hours gathering enough wood for the coming weeks. I turned down this small access road I knew about that led to an abandoned gravel pit. It wasn't much, just a dirt track really, maybe 100 yards off the main highway. I'd been there before and knew there was usually good wood in the area that nobody bothered with. After parking, I grabbed my work gloves and hatchet, then started walking along the edge of this deep gully that runs alongside the pit. I'd gone maybe 150 yards when I spotted something down at the bottom of the ravine. At first, I just registered movement, something big and reddish-brown. My first thought was bear, naturally. It was about 50 yards away from me, down in the gully, but something felt off immediately. The animal was standing completely upright on its back legs. Now, I know bears stand up sometimes, but this thing was just standing there. It seemed to be digging or scratching at some bushes. I couldn't see its head clearly because there were branches hanging down, blocking my view, but I could see its body well enough. The fur was this deep, reddish-brown color, not black or the grizzled brown you typically see on bears in this region, and the fur on its back looked different, longer and heavier somehow. I also noticed the undersides of its hands were lighter in color than the rest of it. I stood there frozen for maybe 30 seconds, just watching. Something in my gut was telling me this wasn't right. The proportions were wrong for a bear. The way it was standing and using its arms didn't match up with bear behavior I'd witnessed countless times before. That's when I decided I didn't need firewood that badly. I started to turn around to head back to my truck, and I must have made some noise, stepped on a branch or something, because suddenly the animal stopped what it was doing. I glanced back over my shoulder, and what I saw next made my blood run cold. This thing was climbing straight up the opposite side of the gully, and I mean straight up. It was steep, maybe a 60-degree slope, and this creature was scaling it like it was nothing. But here's the thing that really got me. It stayed completely upright the entire time. It was using its arms to pull itself up, grabbing trees and bushes as handholds, but it never dropped to all fours like a bear would. Never. Bears don't climb like that. They use all 4 limbs. This thing moved more like, well, more like a person would climb, but much more powerful. As it reached higher ground, I got a better look at it. It was tall, I'd estimate around 7 to 8 feet, and bulky, not fat, but massively built through the shoulders and torso. Its head looked almost small compared to the rest of its body. The proportions were all wrong for any animal I'm familiar with. When it reached the top of the slope, it disappeared into a stand of lodgepole pines without ever breaking its upright stance. The whole sighting probably lasted less than a minute, but it felt like time had slowed down. I didn't stick around. I practically ran back to my truck, fumbled with my keys, and got out of there fast. My hands were shaking so badly I could hardly get the key in the ignition. I remember sitting there for a moment, engine running, trying to process what I'd just seen. I've spent my entire life in these woods. I was raised hunting and fishing. I've encountered black bears and grizzlies dozens of times. This wasn't a bear. The movement patterns were fundamentally different. Bears have a rolling gait even when standing. This creature moved with purpose, almost like a human but with a heavier, more powerful motion. For weeks afterward, I couldn't stop thinking about it. I'd wake up in the middle of the night, seeing those movements in my mind. I told my wife, but no one else for a long time. Who would believe me? I didn't even know if I believed myself. I went back to that spot about a week later, in the middle of the day, with my hunting rifle. I don't know what I was expecting to find. Maybe tracks or hair caught on branches, something to validate what I'd seen. I found some broken branches on that slope, and what might have been large footprints. But the ground was too hard and leaf-covered to make out anything distinct. The thing that still haunts me is the casual nature of it. This wasn't some creature charging or acting aggressive. It was just existing, going about its business until I disturbed it. That makes it feel more real to me somehow. If my brain was making something up, wouldn't it have charged me or done something dramatic? For years, I dismissed my own experience. I told myself it must have been a bear and my eyes were playing tricks on me, but I know what I saw. The image of that creature climbing up that slope, remaining upright the whole time, using its arms to pull itself up. That's not something I could mistake or invent. I've been hunting in those same woods many times since then. I've seen plenty of bears, and every single time I'm reminded of how differently they move compared to what I saw that September morning. What really gets me is the silence of the whole encounter. There were no dramatic roars or screams, just the quiet sounds of branches moving, feet on soil, and my own heartbeat pounding in my ears. Real life isn't like the movies. When something truly unexplainable happens, it's often quiet and over before you can fully process it. The more I've thought about it over the years, the more certain I've become. I believe what I saw that morning was what some people call a Sasquatch or Bigfoot. I never thought I'd be one of those people. I've always been skeptical of such things, but I know what bears look like and how they move. This wasn't that. About 5 years after my experience, I finally worked up the courage to tell my brother-in-law, who's also an outdoorsman. To my surprise, he didn't laugh. He told me a logger friend of his had seen something similar in the same general area back in the early 90s. They'd written it off as exhaustion and tricks of light at the time. Hearing that gave me chills. I've since read about other sightings in British Columbia, and many describe the same reddish-brown color and climbing ability I witnessed. It's oddly comforting to know I'm not alone, though I still don't bring it up in casual conversation. The detail that sticks with me most is the hands. When it was reaching for branches to pull itself up, I could see its hands clearly for a moment. They weren't paws. The undersides were lighter in color, almost pinkish tan, and they moved with dexterity, grasping branches deliberately. Bears don't do that. I still go into the woods. I still hunt and fish and gather firewood. But I'm more aware now, more observant. Sometimes I feel like I'm being watched, especially in remote areas. Maybe that's just paranoia born from my experience, or maybe it's not. I've never seen anything like it again. Despite spending countless hours in the backcountry, part of me hopes I never do. Another part of me wishes I had a camera with me that day, so I'd have proof, not just for others, but for myself. After all these years, the memory has the slight fuzziness that comes with time. Though certain details remain crystal clear, I don't know what to make of what I saw. I'm not claiming to have definitive proof of Sasquatch. I'm just a guy who saw something in the woods that I can't explain. Something that moved in a way no known animal moves. Something that for just a moment made me question everything I thought I knew about the wilderness I've spent my life in. Sometimes I wonder if it saw me before I saw it. If it had been watching me walk along that gully edge before I ever noticed it. That thought keeps me alert these days when I'm alone in the forest. I still go to that general area sometimes, though never alone and never to that exact spot. I just can't bring myself to, not out of fear exactly, but out of a weird respect, like I'd be intruding. That probably sounds ridiculous. I've never reported this officially, never called any researchers or authorities. What would I say? I saw something strange 25 years ago, and I'm pretty sure it wasn't a bear. Without evidence, it's just a story. My story. I don't know why I'm finally writing this down now. Maybe because I'm getting older and I want some record of it. Maybe because I've recently read about similar sightings in that area and it's stirred up all those old memories. Or maybe I just need to get it off my chest after all these years. All I know for certain is what I saw that morning by Nicolm Creek wasn't something that's supposed to exist, and yet I saw it. Story 11. I still can't explain what happened that night back in '82. Even now, 40 years later, I get chills thinking about those red eyes staring at me in the darkness. I've never written this down before, but maybe someone here has experienced something similar. My Uncle Frank invited me and my cousin Peter camping east of Orange in New South Wales. I was 15 at the time. Peter was 16. Uncle Frank was always taking us on these outdoor adventures, fishing, camping, teaching us how to track animals and survive in the bush. He worked as a park ranger and knew all the best spots away from the regular tourist areas. This particular trip, we set up camp near a water facility by this little creek. It was beautiful but remote, just the way Uncle Frank liked it. The facility was some kind of water monitoring station, just a small concrete building with a fence around it. The creek wasn't much, but it was running despite being the middle of summer. God, it was hot that January. Must have been at least 35 degrees during the day. We'd spent most of our time swimming in the deeper parts of the creek and hiding in the shade. By nightfall, we were exhausted but happy, cooking sausages over the fire and listening to Uncle Frank's stories about the old gold mines in the hills behind us. Those mines go back to the 1850s, he told us, pointing to the steep hillside behind our tents. All abandoned now, but people found some decent gold up there back in the day. I remember looking up at that hillside. It was practically vertical in places, covered in scrub and deadfall timber. In the fading light, it looked ominous, all shadows and angles. Peter asked if we could explore them tomorrow, but Uncle Frank shook his head. Too dangerous. Those old shafts aren't maintained. One wrong step and you're gone. We finished our dinner and sat around the fire until about 10 o'clock. Uncle Frank turned in first, heading to his tent with a reminder not to stay up too late. Peter and I stayed up another hour, talking about school and girls and whatever else teenage boys talk about when they think they're being profound. It must have been close to midnight when we finally crawled into our tent. The temperature had barely dropped, and the air in the tent was stifling. We had the rain flap pulled back to get some air, with just the mesh between us and the outside world. Our day packs were sitting outside near the entrance. We'd been too lazy to bring them in. I don't know how long we'd been asleep when the noise woke me up. At first, I thought it was just Peter moving around. But then I realized he was awake too, propped up on one elbow. "You hear that?" he whispered. I nodded, suddenly very aware of rustling sounds outside our tent. Something was messing with our packs. "Probably possums," Peter said, but he didn't sound convinced. The rustling continued, methodical, not the frantic movement you'd expect from a small animal. Whatever it was, it seemed to be deliberately going through our stuff. "Throw something at it," Peter suggested. I grabbed one of my boots and tossed it out through the mesh opening. It landed with a dull thud, but the rustling didn't stop. If anything, it became more deliberate, like whatever was out there was now curious about the boot too. Peter threw his boot next. Again, nothing changed. The rustling continued. "Maybe it's a dingo," I whispered, though we were pretty far east for dingoes. "Go check," Peter said. "Why me?" "Because I threw the last boot. Your turn." I wanted to argue, but there was something about the way Peter was looking at me that made me think he was genuinely scared. Looking back, I think I was just running on that teenage bravado where you do stupid things to prove you're not afraid. "Fine," I muttered, crawling toward the tent opening. I unzipped the mesh just enough to stick my head out. The moon was nearly full, casting everything in silver light. Our packs were definitely being disturbed. One was knocked over, its contents partially spilled out. That's when I felt it. A presence. You know that feeling when someone's watching you? This was like that, but 10 times stronger. I slowly raised my eyes from the packs to the dirt road that ran in front of our campsite, and there they were. 2 eyes, glowing coal red in the darkness, staring directly at me. My blood turned to ice. The eyes were about 10 to 15 feet away, but what struck me immediately was their height from the ground. I was kneeling at the tent entrance, and these eyes were well above my eye level. They had to be at least 7 feet off the ground. We just stared at each other. I couldn't move, couldn't breathe. It felt like time had stopped. There was no sound except for my heartbeat pounding in my ears. I've tried for years to remember if I could make out a shape around those eyes, but all I can recall with certainty are those 2 glowing red points in the darkness. They weren't reflecting light like a cat's or dog's eyes. They seemed to have their own inner glow, like hot coals. I don't know what possessed me to do what I did next. Maybe it was panic, maybe it was some primal fight or flight response, but I grabbed my other boot and hurled it as hard as I could toward those eyes. The reaction was immediate and terrifying. The eyes disappeared for a split second, and then I heard it, a sound I'll never forget as long as I live. Not quite a growl, not quite a grunt, but something in between, deep and guttural. Then came the movement. Whatever it was, it bolted away from the road toward the hillside behind our tents. I could hear its footfalls, heavy and fast, but with a strange rhythm that didn't sound like any animal I knew. It wasn't the loping gait of a kangaroo or the padding of a dog. It sounded bipedal, like a person running, but much heavier and faster than any human could move. Then came the most impossible part. This thing went straight up that nearly vertical hillside, the same one Uncle Frank had warned us about. We could hear it crashing through the undergrowth, snapping branches, dislodging rocks that clattered down the slope. The sound of its passage continued all the way to the top, where the old mine entrances were, and then everything went silent. In the tent, Peter was white as a sheet. "What the hell was that?" he whispered. I shook my head, unable to form words. My hands were trembling so badly I could barely zip the tent closed. "Should we wake Uncle Frank?" Peter asked. I thought about it, but something stopped me. "Let's wait till morning," I said, though I'm not sure why. Maybe I was afraid Uncle Frank wouldn't believe us, or worse, that he'd go investigating and encounter that thing himself. Neither of us slept a wink for the rest of the night. We sat huddled in our sleeping bags, jumping at every sound from the forest. I kept my pocket knife clutched in my hand, though what good it would have done against whatever was out there, I don't know. As soon as the first light of dawn broke, I unzipped the tent and peeked out. Our packs were a mess, contents scattered around. My boots, the ones I'd thrown, were lying in the dirt several feet apart. Uncle Frank emerged from his tent, looking refreshed and completely oblivious to our night of terror. "You boys sleep well?" he asked, stretching. Peter and I exchanged glances. "Not really," I admitted. "Something was going through our packs last night." Uncle Frank frowned, coming over to inspect the mess. "Probably a possum or a quoll. You didn't leave any food in there, did you?" "No," Peter said. "But it wasn't a possum, Uncle Frank. It was huge." I told him about the eyes, about how high off the ground they were, about the thing running up the hill. As I spoke, Uncle Frank's expression changed from skeptical to concerned. "You're sure about this? Not having me on?" "I swear," I said. "It went straight up that hillside like it was nothing." Uncle Frank looked at the slope, shaking his head. "That's a 60-degree incline in places. Nothing that size could climb it that fast." "It did," Peter insisted. We both heard it. After breakfast, while Uncle Frank was packing up some of our gear, I decided to try the hillside myself. I wanted proof, wanted to show that what we'd seen was real. I made it about 10 feet up before the loose soil and rocks made it impossible to continue. My shoes kept slipping, and I had to grab onto scrub to keep from sliding back down. How something large enough to have eyes 7 feet off the ground could have scaled this slope at speed was beyond comprehension. When I got back to camp, Uncle Frank was deep in thought. "No missing zoo animals been reported," he said, almost to himself. "Nearest zoo's in Dubbo anyway, and they'd have put out alerts if something large escaped." "What do you think it was?" I asked. Uncle Frank was silent for a long moment. "There are stories," he finally said. "Old stories from the Aboriginal people about a creature in these parts. They call it different names depending on the tribe. Some call it Yowie." "Like Bigfoot?" Peter asked incredulously. Uncle Frank shrugged. "I'm not saying that's what you saw, but there've been reports over the years, people with no reason to lie, seeing something they can't explain." We spent another hour searching the area for footprints or any other evidence. The ground was too hard and rocky to hold clear impressions. I realized later that I never noticed any particular smell during the encounter. No odor at all, which seems strange for a large animal. We packed up and left earlier than planned. The drive home was quiet, each of us lost in our thoughts. Uncle Frank made us promise not to spread wild stories, said it would just lead to people coming out to the area looking for monsters, which could be dangerous given the old mines. So I kept quiet about it for years. Occasionally, Peter and I would talk about it when we got together, trying to make sense of what we'd seen. We considered every possibility: escaped exotic animal, feral human living in the bush, even some kind of mass hallucination, though that made no sense since we both experienced the same thing. But I keep coming back to those eyes, coal red and intelligent, looking right at me with a kind of awareness that no animal I've ever encountered possesses. And the way it moved up that impossible slope, like gravity was a mere suggestion it could choose to ignore. I've never gone camping in that area again. Uncle Frank passed away 5 years ago, taking whatever theories he might have developed to his grave. Peter moved to Western Australia, and we rarely speak now, but sometimes, when I'm lying awake at night, I can still see those eyes staring at me from the darkness. And I wonder what would have happened if I hadn't thrown that boot, if instead of driving it away, I had somehow angered it enough to make it stay. Story 12. I've never told this story to anyone outside my closest friends. Even now, 40 years later, my hands are shaking as I type this. I don't expect anyone to believe me, but I need to get this off my chest. This happened back in '83 when I was 19. I was dating Julie, my high school sweetheart. We'd been together for about a year at that point. We both still lived with our parents in Washope, a small town in New South Wales, so finding privacy was always a challenge. Like most young couples with nowhere else to go, we'd often drive out to secluded spots. Mount Clamber Road was our go-to place. It was this winding dirt road that cut through dense bushland about 20 minutes from town. During the day, it was beautiful. Tall eucalyptus trees, the occasional wallaby hopping across the road. But at night, it was different. Pitch black, except for your headlights. No street lamps, no houses, nothing. It was a Friday night in February, middle of summer, hot and sticky, even with the windows down. I'd borrowed my dad's Holden Commodore, told him we were going to the drive-in at Port Macquarie. A little after 9, we headed out to our usual spot, a small clearing about halfway up Mount Clamber Road. The night started like any other. We parked, turned off the engine, but left the radio on low. Some Aussie rock band was playing, can't remember which one. We got into the back seat and, well, you know what teenagers do when they're alone. Everything was normal until it wasn't. I can't explain exactly when things changed, but suddenly I felt wrong. It was like someone had poured ice water down my spine. The hair on my arms stood up, and I got this overwhelming feeling that we weren't alone anymore. Julie was lying beneath me, but I'd completely stopped moving. She whispered, "What's wrong?" I couldn't even answer her. My mouth had gone dry, and this terrible dread was spreading through my chest like poison. It wasn't just fear, it was something deeper, more primal, like my body knew something my brain hadn't processed yet. I felt weak, almost dizzy, like something was draining the strength right out of me. I slowly turned my head toward the driver's side window. The moonlight was casting weird shadows through the trees, making everything look distorted. At first I didn't see anything unusual, just the dark outlines of bushes and trees. Then I saw it. About 4 meters away from the car, partially hidden behind some bushes, was a head. Not a human head. This thing was massive, maybe 4 times bigger than a person's head should be. It was just there, watching us. I couldn't see its body clearly in the darkness, but I could make out the silhouette of something huge standing there. The worst part was its eyes. They were set wide apart, maybe 10 to 15 centimeters between them, and they had this glow to them. Not like a reflection, the way a cat's eyes catch headlights. This was different. It was like they were illuminated from within, giving off their own light, a dull, yellowish-green glow that didn't seem natural. Those eyes were staring directly at me, not just looking at the car, but at me, personally, like it knew exactly who I was and what I was doing there. I couldn't move, couldn't breathe. It felt like those eyes were pinning me in place. The longer it stared, the weaker I felt. My limbs were heavy, my thoughts becoming sluggish. It was like it was feeding off my fear, my energy, my life force, whatever you want to call it. Julie must have sensed something was wrong because she started to sit up. I finally snapped out of it enough to push her back down. I didn't want her to see it. I didn't want those eyes to fix on her instead of me. "Get dressed," I whispered, my voice barely audible. "Now." She must have heard the terror in my voice because she didn't question me. We scrambled to pull our clothes on in the cramped back seat. The whole time, I kept my eyes locked on that thing outside. It didn't move, just kept watching with those glowing eyes. When we were somewhat decent, I climbed into the front seat, fumbling with the keys. My hands were shaking so badly I could hardly get the key in the ignition. The creature still hadn't moved, but I could feel its presence getting heavier, closer somehow. Even though it hadn't taken a step, the engine roared to life and I threw the car into reverse, spinning the tires on the dirt. Julie was asking what was happening, but I couldn't answer. All I could think was, "Get away, get away, get away." I slammed the car into drive and floored it. The headlights briefly swept across the spot where the creature was standing, and for a split second, I saw more of it. It was tall, taller than any man I'd ever seen, and covered in what looked like dark hair or fur. Its arms hung at its sides, unnaturally long with huge hands. But it was the face that's burned into my memory. Not quite human, not quite animal, something in between that shouldn't exist. We tore down that dirt road faster than was safe. The car was bouncing and sliding, and Julie was screaming at me to slow down, to tell her what was happening. I couldn't form words. All I could do was drive, putting as much distance between us and that thing as possible. It wasn't until we hit the main road back to town that I finally eased off the accelerator. My heart was pounding so hard, I thought it might burst through my chest. I was drenched in sweat, my shirt sticking to my back. "What the hell, Mark?" Julie was furious, scared. "What happened back there?" I tried to explain what I'd seen, but the words sounded insane even as I said them. Giant head, glowing eyes, the feeling of my energy being drained. Julie hadn't seen anything. She'd been facing the other way the whole time. "Are you serious?" she asked, looking at me like I'd lost my mind. "You nearly killed us driving like that because you saw a What? A monster? Put that way, it did sound ridiculous. Part of me wanted to believe I'd imagined it, that it was just shadows playing tricks on my eyes, but I knew what I'd seen, and more importantly, I knew what I'd felt. That bone-deep dread, that sensation of being fed upon somehow. That wasn't something you could imagine. Julie tried to convince me it was probably just a wallaby or a wild pig, something normal that looked strange in the darkness. I nodded and pretended to agree, but I knew better. No animal has eyes like that. No animal makes you feel like your soul is being sucked out through your pores. We didn't talk much on the drive back to town. When I dropped her off, she kissed me goodnight, but there was a new distance between us, like she was reassessing who I was, wondering if I was stable. We broke up 2 weeks later. She never said it was because of that night, but I knew it was. For months afterward, I couldn't sleep properly. Every time I closed my eyes, I'd see those glowing eyes staring at me. I refused to drive anywhere near Mount Clamber Road, taking long detours even in broad daylight. My mates thought I was being dramatic, but they hadn't seen what I'd seen. Years later, I was having a beer with some guys from work when one of them, an older bloke who'd lived in the area his whole life, started telling stories about strange sightings in the bush. People reporting huge, hairy creatures watching them from the trees. He mentioned that these beings seemed particularly drawn to couples who parked in secluded areas, like they were fascinated by human intimacy. My blood ran cold. I wanted to tell him my story, to ask if anyone had reported seeing those glowing eyes, but I couldn't bring myself to do it. Even now, I'm afraid people will think I'm crazy or making it up. I've spent decades trying to rationalize what happened that night. Was it an undiscovered species, some kind of paranormal entity, a hallucination brought on by fear? I don't know. But what I do know is that it was real, and it changed me forever. I moved away from Washoe a year after the incident. Couldn't stand being so close to those woods anymore. I've been living in Brisbane ever since. I got married, had kids, built a normal life, but I've never gone camping, never taken my family bushwalking. My wife thinks I'm just not the outdoorsy type. She doesn't know that I'm terrified of what might be watching from the trees. Sometimes I wonder if anyone else has seen it. If there are others out there who felt that same terrible draining sensation, who've looked into those glowing eyes and known, on some primal level, that they were in the presence of something that shouldn't exist. All I know is that 40 years later, I still wake up in a cold sweat sometimes, feeling those eyes on me. And I still can't explain what happened that night on Mount Clamber Road. I don't think I ever will. Story 13. I still get chills thinking about that night back in 2003. It was October. I remember because the leaves were changing and there was that bite in the air that comes with fall in the mountains. I've been driving trucks for over 15 years now, and I know every back road and mountain pass around Ashton like the back of my hand. That particular night, I was heading back to work after my weekend off, taking that shortcut over the West Mountain Pass that saves about 20 minutes compared to the main highway. It was around 9:30 at night, pitch black out there in the mountains. No streetlights, no houses, just my headlights cutting through the darkness. The road winds pretty tight through there, so I was taking it slow in my rig, just a steady 40 miles per hour or so. You get used to seeing wildlife out there, deer, elk, even the occasional moose. I'm always scanning the roadside, especially at night. It's just second nature when you drive these roads as much as I do. I was about halfway through the pass, right where it gets really dense with pines on both sides, when I caught something in my lights that made me ease off the accelerator. At first, I thought maybe it was deer eyes reflecting back, but something didn't seem right. The reflection was too high off the ground, way higher than any deer I'd ever seen. I'm thinking at least 6.5, maybe 7 feet up. Now we get black bears around here, and my first thought was, maybe it's a bear standing up on its hind legs. I slowed down more, actually came to a full stop right in the middle of that deserted road. I put my hazards on, though there wasn't another car for miles. Something about those eyes made me need to know what I was looking at. I shifted into reverse, backed up maybe 30 feet to where I'd seen the reflection, and then angled my truck so the headlights would shine into the trees where I'd spotted it. That's when I saw it clearly, and I knew immediately it wasn't a bear. My blood went cold. Standing there just at the edge of the tree line was something I can only describe as massive. It was covered in thick black hair, not fur like a bear, but longer, more like hair that hung off its body. It was especially thick around the shoulders and arms. The hair looked matted in places, like it had been out in the elements for a long time. The thing was just standing there, completely upright on two legs. Bears can stand, sure, but they look awkward doing it, kind of hunched forward. This thing stood straight, with broad shoulders and a posture that reminded me of a person, but much larger and more powerful looking. I couldn't make out its face very well in the shadows, but those eyes caught my headlights again. They seemed to glow for a split second before it turned its head away from the light. I sat there frozen, gripping my steering wheel so tight my knuckles were white. I couldn't tell you how long we just stared at each other, probably only seconds, but it felt like forever. My diesel engine was idling loud in the quiet night, headlights blazing right at this thing, and it didn't seem startled or scared at all. That's what keeps coming back to me. Any normal animal would have bolted from the noise and light, but this thing just observed me. Then it moved. It didn't run or scramble like a startled animal. It just turned deliberately and walked into the trees. The way it moved was all wrong for a bear or any animal I know of. It walked on two legs the entire time, with a smooth gait that was heavier than a human's, like each step had real weight behind it. Its arms swung slightly at its sides. It disappeared into the darkness between the trees within seconds, but I could hear branches breaking as it moved away. My heart was hammering in my chest. I sat there for maybe another minute, trying to process what I'd just seen. Part of me thought I should get out and look for tracks or something, but there was no way in hell I was getting out of my truck. I'm not ashamed to admit I was terrified. Whatever that thing was, it was big enough to do some serious damage if it wanted to. I put the truck in drive and got out of there, driving faster than was probably safe on those winding roads. My hands were shaking on the wheel. I kept checking my mirrors, half expecting to see it following me or something. My mind was racing, trying to make sense of what I'd seen. I've hunted all my life, spent countless hours in these mountains, and I've never seen anything like that. When I got to work, I didn't tell anyone at first. In a small town like Ashton, you get a reputation real quick if you start talking about seeing monsters in the woods. But after a couple of days, I mentioned it to my buddy Mike, who's been a Forest Service guy for decades. I expected him to laugh, but he just got real quiet and asked for exact details about where I'd seen it. That's when he told me there had been similar reports over the years. Not many, but enough that the locals have a sort of unspoken agreement not to talk about it much. Since that night, I've driven that same pass hundreds of times. I always slow down at that exact spot, always look into those trees, hoping to catch another glimpse, just to prove to myself I wasn't seeing things, haven't seen it again. But sometimes, especially on quiet nights when the moon is low, I get this feeling like I'm being watched from the tree line. The thing that still bothers me most wasn't the size or the hair, or even how it moved. It was the complete lack of fear. It looked at me like I was the curiosity, not the other way around, like it was fully aware of itself and me, and just decided I wasn't worth its time. There was an intelligence there that I can't explain. I've tried researching what it might have been. I've gone down internet rabbit holes reading about unidentified creatures in the Pacific Northwest. Some descriptions match what I saw. The height, the hair, the walking upright. But I'm not trying to put a label on it. I know what I saw. And it wasn't a bear, wasn't a moose, wasn't anything I've encountered before or since. Sometimes I wonder if I should have followed it, tried to get evidence or something. But then I remember the sheer size of it, how solid and powerful it looked. And I know I made the right call just driving away. Whatever it was perfectly adapted to those mountains in a way humans aren't. That was its territory, not mine. I still drive trucks through that pass, still keep my eyes open, still get that cold feeling in my spine when I pass that particular stretch of road. I don't know if I'll ever see it again, but I know one thing for certain. Those mountains hold secrets that most people will never understand, and maybe that's for the best. The weird thing is, I'm not even sure I want to see it again. Part of me does, just for validation, but another part of me feels like I glimpsed something that wasn't meant to be seen, something that's existed out there long before roads cut through those mountains, and will probably still be there long after the roads are gone. I've never been able to shake the feeling that it let me see it, that it could have easily disappeared before my headlights found it, but for whatever reason, it chose to be seen that night. By me. A random truck driver on a back mountain road. Why me? What was different about that night? These are the questions that keep me up sometimes. It's been almost 20 years now, and I still think about it at least once a week. Still scan the tree line when I drive through there. Still wonder what would have happened if I'd gotten out of my truck that night. Would it have disappeared? Would it have approached? Would anyone have ever found me if things had gone badly? I don't have answers. Just the memory of those eyes reflecting in my headlights, that massive silhouette, and the casual, almost dismissive way it turned and walked away, like I wasn't worth its concern, like it had seen thousands of humans come and go through its mountains and would see thousands more. That's my story. Call it what you want, Bigfoot, Sasquatch, or just a weird bear. I know what I saw, and I know it wasn't anything that has a proper name in any biology textbook. Whatever it was, it belongs to those mountains, and sometimes, on dark nights when I'm driving that pass, I feel like the mountains belong to it. Story 14. I've been holding this in for almost 20 years now, and I need to get it off my chest. Most people I've told either laugh or look at me like I'm crazy, but I know what I saw that day, and it changed me forever. This happened back in September 2004, when I was 10 years old. We lived on a dairy farm just outside Decorah, Iowa. If you know anything about that part of Iowa, you know it's not all flat farmland like people think. Our property backed up to these limestone bluffs with thick woods, caves, and sinkholes. Beyond our back fence was nothing but wild, undeveloped land that stretched for miles. My dad ran the dairy operation with about 60 Holstein cows, and we all had our chores. Mine was usually to help bring the cows in for evening milking. We had this Appaloosa gelding named Ace that I'd ride out to the pasture. He was the calmest, most reliable horse you could imagine, steady as a rock and never spooked at anything. I'd been riding him since I was 7, and he took care of me. That evening, it was a Tuesday, I remember, because Wednesday was my favorite day at school with art class. Dad asked me to round up the cows while he and my older brother Mike got the milking parlor ready. It was around 6:15, still plenty of daylight left, but getting toward that golden hour when the sun makes everything look kind of yellow. The cows were grazing at the far end of our property near where the pasture meets the tree line. I remember it was unusually quiet that evening. No wind, no distant tractors running, just this heavy stillness in the air. I trotted Ace along the fence line, planning to circle around behind the herd to drive them toward the barn. When we got about halfway to the back of the property, Ace just stopped, dead in his tracks. At first, I thought maybe he'd stepped on something or gotten a stone in his hoof. I gave him a gentle nudge with my heels, but he wouldn't budge. I clicked my tongue like Dad taught me, but nothing. "Come on, Ace," I said, patting his neck. "We got to get the cows." That's when I noticed his ears. They were pinned flat against his head, and his whole body had gone rigid. He started snorting, not normal snorts, but these deep, hard blows, like he was trying to clear his nostrils of something awful. Then he started pawing at the ground with his front hoof, stomping hard. I'd never seen him act like this, ever. This was a horse that didn't even flinch during thunderstorms. Something was seriously wrong, and a cold feeling started creeping up my spine. I remember looking around, thinking maybe there was a coyote or something nearby. For several minutes, probably only 2 or 3, but it felt like forever. I tried everything to get Ace moving. I was getting frustrated and a little scared because the sun was starting to dip lower, and Dad would be wondering where I was with the cows. Then I saw it, about 60 or 70 yards ahead of us, near this scraggly cedar tree at the edge of our property. Something moved. At first, I just caught a glimpse of motion, but then it stood up. It stood up from behind that little cedar where it must have been crouching or sitting. My breath just stopped in my chest. This thing rose up to its full height, and I knew immediately it wasn't a person. No way. It was way too tall, taller than any human I'd ever seen. My dad is 6'2", and this thing would have towered over him by at least a foot, maybe more. It was solid black or dark brown, hard to tell in the evening light, but definitely dark all over. Not like it was wearing dark clothes, but like its whole body was this single dark color from head to toe. The shape was human-like, with arms and legs and a head, but the proportions were all wrong. The chest and shoulders were massive, way too wide and thick to be a person wearing a coat or something. What still sticks with me is how it didn't reflect any light. You know how even dark clothing will catch some shine from the sun? This thing just absorbed light, like a void standing there at the edge of our pasture. I couldn't make out a face. I was too far away and too terrified to really register details, but I could see it turn its head toward me and Ace. It didn't make a sound, not one sound. It just stood there for maybe 5 seconds, completely still, and then it turned and walked, no, strode, toward our back fence. The way it moved wasn't right either. It covered ground way faster than a person should, with these long, fluid steps. When it reached the fence, a 4-foot barbed wire fence that marked the edge of our property, it just stepped over it. One smooth motion without breaking stride. No human could have done that. The fence didn't even slow it down. I didn't get to see where it went after that because the second it appeared, Ace lost it completely. He reared up slightly and then bolted back toward the barn. I'm lucky I didn't fall off. I dropped the reins and just grabbed the saddle horn with both hands, hanging on for dear life as he galloped full speed across the pasture. When we reached the barn, Ace was lathered in sweat and still trembling. Dad and Mike came running out when they heard us thunder into the yard. "Jacob!" "What the hell happened?" Dad shouted, grabbing Ace's bridle to calm him down. I was crying by then, both from fear and from the wild ride. Between sobs, I told them what I'd seen. To their credit, they didn't dismiss me outright. Dad's face got really serious, and he and Mike went inside to grab their rifles. "Stay here with your mom," Dad said. "We're going to check it out." They took the ATV out to the back pasture and searched for about an hour. When they came back, they said they hadn't found any tracks or signs of whatever I'd seen. The cows were still grazing peacefully, which Dad thought was strange if there had been a predator nearby. "Maybe it was a bear," Mom suggested that night as she tucked me in. "They sometimes pass through from Minnesota, but I knew it wasn't a bear. Bears don't stand upright like that, don't walk on 2 legs with that kind of purpose, and definitely don't clear fences in a single step." Over the next few years, weird things would happen around our property. We'd hear these strange screams from the woods at night. Not like an animal exactly. More like something trying to sound like an animal, but not quite getting it right. Sometimes we'd see movement in the brush near the house. Just quick glimpses of something large moving through the undergrowth. Our hunting dogs would refuse to go into certain areas of the woods. They'd just sit down and whine, no matter how much you called them. And occasionally, maybe 3 or 4 times a year, this awful smell would drift across our property, like rotting meat and wet garbage, and something else I can't even describe. It was so strong it would make your eyes water. Dad eventually stopped talking about my wild story, but I noticed he started carrying his sidearm more often when working the back pastures. He also installed these super bright security lights that covered the entire area between our barn and the tree line. I never saw the creature again, Not clearly anyway, but I know what it was. I've spent countless hours researching since then, and everything points to one conclusion. I saw a Bigfoot that day. The size, the way it moved, the complete silence, my horse's reaction, it all fits. People who don't live in rural areas don't understand how much empty space there still is in this country. The area behind our farm had deep hollows, caves, and miles of undisturbed forest. A creature that didn't want to be found could easily hide there. I'm 29 now with a family of my own. We live in Des Moines, and I work in IT, about as far from that dairy farm as you can get. But I still go back to visit my parents, who still run the farm. The weird thing is, I've never been able to make myself go near that back fence again. Not once in all these years. My dad and brother respect that without me having to explain. When we're all together doing work on the farm, one of them always volunteers to handle anything that needs doing back there. They've never said it outright, but I think they believe me now. Something happened on our property over the years that convinced them. Last Christmas, after a few beers, Mike told me that in 2011, he was fixing a section of that back fence when he felt like he was being watched. He turned around to see a pair of eyes reflecting from deep in the woods, too high off the ground to be a deer or coyote. He said he just calmly picked up his tools, walked back to his truck and finished the repair another day. I still have nightmares sometimes. Not often, maybe once or twice a year. Always the same. I'm on Ace, and we're approaching that cedar tree. But this time, the creature doesn't run away. It comes toward us instead. I always wake up before it reaches me. The logical part of my brain has tried to explain it away over the years. Maybe it was a guy in a ghillie suit. Maybe it was a bear, and my 10-year-old mind exaggerated. Maybe it was just a shadow, and Ace spooked at something else entirely. But then I remember how Ace acted that day. Horses don't lie. They don't imagine things. Something was there that terrified an unflappable horse, something that my 10-year-old self saw clearly enough to remember vividly 20 years later. I know what I saw, and I still don't go near that back fence. Story 15. I still get goosebumps thinking about what happened on that hike. I've been an avid hiker for about 7 years now, but nothing prepared me for what my buddy Tyler and I experienced on 5 Mile Mountain last October. The day started like any other hiking trip. Clear skies, cool autumn weather, perfect conditions. Tyler and I had been planning this particular hike for weeks. 5 Mile Mountain isn't the most challenging trail in our area, but it has some decent elevation gain and beautiful views once you reach the ridgeline. We'd hiked it a couple times before without incident. We arrived at the trailhead around 9 in the morning. The parking lot was practically empty, except for 2 other cars. That should have been my first clue. Something was off. This trail is usually pretty popular on weekends, especially during peak fall foliage season. Looks like we've got the mountain to ourselves today, Tyler said as we grabbed our packs from the trunk. I remember feeling oddly uneasy as we started up the trail, but I brushed it off as just being out of shape. The first mile was uneventful, just the usual uphill slog through maple and oak trees, with their leaves turning brilliant shades of red and orange. We chatted about work, complained about our fantasy football teams, normal stuff. About 2 miles in, something changed. I can't fully explain it, but the forest just felt different. The birds had gone quiet. The air felt heavier somehow, like the moment before a thunderstorm, except there wasn't a cloud in the sky. You feeling that? I asked Tyler. He nodded, glancing around. Yeah, something feels off. We kept hiking, but more cautiously now. The trail narrows at this point, with a steep drop-off to the right and a densely wooded slope to the left. I remember checking my watch. It was just past 11, and thinking maybe we should turn back. We'd planned to do the full 8-mile loop, but neither of us was feeling it anymore. Let's just get to the viewpoint and then head back down, I suggested, and Tyler quickly agreed. We made it to the viewpoint, snapped a couple half-hearted photos, but couldn't shake that weird feeling. The view was spectacular as always, rolling mountains stretching to the horizon, a patchwork of autumn colors. But it felt like we were being watched. "Let's get out of here," Tyler said after about 5 minutes. I didn't argue. We turned and started back down the trail. That's when it happened. We'd been hiking downhill for maybe 20 minutes when a rock, not small, probably the size of a grapefruit, came flying out of nowhere from the left side of the trail. It smashed against another rock about 10 feet to our right with a loud crack before tumbling down the slope. We both froze. My first thought was other hikers messing around, but we hadn't seen anyone else on the trail. "What the hell was that?" Tyler whispered. "Rock slide, maybe?" I offered, not believing it myself. The rock had been thrown, not fallen. It had an arc to it. We stood there for a minute, listening. The forest was dead silent. No birds, no rustling leaves, nothing. "Let's keep moving," I said, trying to sound calmer than I felt. We continued downhill, walking faster now. I kept glancing to our left, up the wooded slope, but couldn't see anything unusual. Then it hit me. What if it was a Bigfoot? I'd read stories about them throwing rocks to scare people away from their territory. I'd always been skeptical, but in that moment, it seemed plausible. I decided to test my theory. I picked up a small rock from the trail and tossed it into the woods to our left. Nothing happened for about 30 seconds, and I was about to feel really stupid when another rock came sailing out of the trees, landing on the trail about 20 feet ahead of us. "Holy shit," Tyler muttered. "Did you see that?" I nodded, my mouth suddenly dry. I threw a rock in there and something threw one back. "Do it again," Tyler said. I picked up another rock and threw it into the woods. This time the response was almost immediate. A rock roughly the same size came flying back, landing closer to us than the first one. "This is insane," I said, but I couldn't stop myself. I threw another rock and another came back, even closer. This bizarre game of catch continued for nearly 20 minutes as we slowly made our way down the trail. The rock thrower remained hidden in the dense forest, but its aim was getting better with each exchange. Whatever it was intelligent enough to understand the game and adjust its throws accordingly. About halfway down the mountain, the trail loops around a small pond. As we approached the water, we heard a violent cracking sound from the woods, like someone was shaking a tree with incredible force. The sound sent chills down my spine. "Did you hear that?" Tyler asked, his voice barely audible. I nodded, then made a decision I still question to this day. I stepped slightly off the trail toward the sound, curious but terrified. The moment I moved toward the trees, I felt an overwhelming sense of dread wash over me. It was primal, instinctual, every cell in my body screaming at me to turn around. So I did what any rational person would do in that situation. I picked up more rocks and threw them toward the sound. The response was immediate and aggressive. 3 rocks came flying back in quick succession, one of them whistling past my head so close I could feel the air displacement. "Jason, stop!" Tyler hissed, grabbing my arm. "You're pissing it off." He was right. We needed to get out of there. We continued down the trail, moving as fast as we safely could on the rocky terrain. For about 5 minutes, everything was quiet. I started to hope maybe we'd left whatever it was behind. Then I noticed something that made my blood run cold. The feeling of being watched had intensified. Whatever had been throwing rocks wasn't staying put. It was following us down the mountain. I decided to test my theory one more time. I stopped, picked up 3 rocks, and quickly threw them one after another into the woods to our left. What happened next still haunts me. Instead of rocks coming from the woods beside us, they came sailing down from a high cliff above the trail. It had somehow circled ahead and above us. 3 rocks rained down, landing just feet from where we stood, and then a 4th, this one the size of a softball, flew directly between Tyler and me, forcing us both to duck. "Run!" I shouted, and we both took off down the trail, no longer caring about watching our footing. We ran for what felt like forever, only slowing when the trail finally widened and flattened out near the base of the mountain. My lungs were burning. and Tyler looked as terrified as I felt. We kept glancing behind us, but nothing was following, at least nothing we could see. The parking lot was a welcome sight. We practically dove into my car, locked the doors, and sat there panting for several minutes before I finally started the engine. What the hell was that?" Tyler finally asked as we pulled away from the trailhead. "I don't know," I said honestly, "but it was intelligent. It understood what we were doing. It adjusted its position. It got better at aiming." We drove in silence for a while before Tyler spoke again. "It was warning us," he said quietly. "First throwing rocks near us, then closer, then right between us. It could have hit us if it wanted to." He was right. Whatever was up there, it wasn't trying to hurt us. It was telling us to leave its territory. And it used escalating warnings to make its point. I've spent countless hours researching since that day, reading accounts of similar experiences. I'm convinced what we encountered was a Sasquatch. I never saw it directly, never caught even a glimpse. But I felt its presence, its intelligence, its power. There was something up there on 5 Mile Mountain that doesn't fit into our understanding of the natural world. I haven't been back to that trail since. Tyler and I don't even talk about it much anymore. It's like this unspoken thing between us. Sometimes when we're having beers, one of us will say, "Remember that day?" and the other just nods. What else is there to say? We played catch with something in the woods that day, something that shouldn't exist, and when we pushed too far, it showed us exactly who was in control on that mountain. The rocks sitting in my garage prove it wasn't a dream. I kept one, the last one that flew between us. Sometimes I hold it and try to make sense of what happened. I'm not sure I ever will. Story 16. I've been hesitating to share this for so long, but after reading similar experiences here, I feel like I need to finally get this off my chest. This happened back in the spring of '97 when I was 13. My cousin Jake and I were hanging out at my parents' place just outside Kite, Georgia. It's this tiny town that most people have never heard of, and our house sat on this decent-sized property with woods surrounding the backyard. That particular day was one of those perfect late spring evenings. Not too hot yet, sun starting to set, but still light enough to be outside. Jake was visiting for the weekend, which always meant non-stop goofing around. My parents were inside making dinner, leaving us to entertain ourselves in the yard like we always did. We had these cheap harmonicas my dad had bought us the Christmas before. Neither of us could actually play worth a damn, but we thought we were awesome, making the most god-awful noise you can imagine. My mum would always joke that we were scaring away all the wildlife for miles. If only that had been true. So there we were, hanging around this old metal trash barrel where my dad would burn papers and stuff. He had a small fire going earlier that day, and it was still smoldering a bit. Our house was about 100 yards from this big pole barn my dad used for storage and his workshop. The yard was pretty well lit near the house, but the light faded the closer you got to the woods. Jake and I had this stupid game we always played where we'd race around the pole barn and back. It was our way of burning off energy before having to go inside for the night. We were setting up by my dad's car, which was parked near the trash barrel. That was our official starting line. I remember blowing a few terrible notes on my harmonica, trying to make Jake laugh. We set our harmonicas on the hood of the car and got ready to race. We took maybe 2 or 3 steps, and then we just stopped. Both of us. At the exact same moment. It wasn't planned. We didn't say anything to each other. It was like our bodies just froze simultaneously. At the edge of the yard, where the light barely reached the tree line, there was something. Someone. A figure. But not a normal person. Not even close. It was massive. I'm not exaggerating when I say it had to be over 7 feet tall, maybe even 8. The proportions were all wrong for a human. The chest and shoulders were just huge, impossibly broad. I remember thinking it looked like 2 linebackers standing side by side, except it was just one thing. What gets me to this day isn't just how big it was, but how it behaved. It was just standing there, watching us. Any normal animal would bolt if two kids suddenly started running in its direction. But this thing didn't move. It didn't run. It just stood there, completely still, observing us. It shifted slightly, turning its body a bit to face us more directly. I remember the movement being smooth, deliberate. Not aggressive, not scared, just curious. It's hard to explain, but it felt like it was studying us. I didn't get a great look at its face. The light didn't reach that far clearly, and honestly, I didn't want to see more. But what I could make out has stayed burned in my memory for 25 years. The outline was vaguely human-like, but not human. The head seemed to sit directly on the shoulders, with barely any neck visible. In that moment, Jake and I didn't scream. We didn't even look at each other. We just turned around and ran back to the house like our lives depended on it. Our bodies reacted before our brains even processed what was happening. It wasn't a conscious decision. Pure instinct took over. We burst through the back door, probably looking like we'd seen a ghost. My mum was at the stove and jumped when we came crashing in. She asked what was wrong, and we tried to explain, talking over each other, pointing toward the woods. "There's something out there," I remember saying, my voice cracking. "A man, but not a man," Jake added, which sounds silly now, but was the most accurate description we could come up with in the moment. My dad grabbed his flashlight and went outside to check, but I knew he wouldn't find anything. Whatever it was would be long gone by then. He walked around the yard, shined the light into the woods a bit, and came back saying he didn't see anything unusual. My parents chalked it up to our imaginations, or maybe a deer that looked strange in the dim light. But Jake and I knew better. We knew what we saw wasn't a deer or a bear or a person. The way it stood, perfectly upright on two legs, the sheer size of it, the deliberate way it moved. No animal acts like that. The weird thing is, there wasn't any of the stuff you typically hear about in these encounters. It didn't smell bad. It didn't make any sounds or growl at us. Its eyes weren't glowing red or anything dramatic like that. It was just there, watching. And somehow, that was more terrifying than if it had charged at us. That night, Jake and I stayed up whispering about what we'd seen. We promised each other we weren't crazy, that it had really happened. We made a pact to go look for tracks the next morning. When morning came, we snuck out early to check the spot where we'd seen it. There was nothing obvious, no massive footprints or broken branches, just the normal forest floor. But there was one thing that bothered me. The area where it had been standing. The ground cover looked slightly compressed, like something heavy had been there. Not definitive proof, but enough to convince us we hadn't imagined it. For years afterward, we barely told anyone about what happened. My best friend laughed when I tried to explain it. My science teacher gave me a book about local wildlife when I vaguely asked about large animals in Georgia forests. Eventually, we just stopped bringing it up. Who would believe us without evidence? But here's the thing. Neither of us has ever doubted what we saw. Not for a second. In all the years since, Jake and I have talked about it maybe 5 or 6 times. We're both in our late 30s now with our own families, living in different states. But whenever we get together, that evening eventually comes up. Our stories have never changed, never contradicted each other. We saw the same thing. About 10 years ago, I stumbled across some articles about Bigfoot sightings in the southeast, and it sent chills down my spine. The descriptions matched what we saw perfectly. I sent some links to Jake, and he called me immediately. We talked for hours that night, finally feeling some validation that maybe, just maybe, we weren't alone in what we experienced. The skeptics always ask the same questions. Why didn't you take a picture? Why didn't you look for more evidence? Why didn't you tell more people? Anyone who's actually been through something like this knows the answers. You don't think clearly in that moment. Your brain can barely process what you're seeing, let alone formulate a plan to document it. And telling people, yeah, Try explaining to your teachers and friends that you saw a giant, hairy, humanoid creature in the woods and see how that goes over. What bothers me most, even now, is wondering what would have happened if we'd kept running toward it instead of back to the house. Was it just curious about us? Would it have disappeared into the trees, or would something worse have happened? I'm thankful we'll never know. I don't go into those woods anymore when I visit my parents. I've never been camping since that day. Jake won't hike without at least 2 other people with him. These might seem like overreactions, but when you've seen something your brain tells you shouldn't exist, it changes you. Sometimes I still dream about it. That massive silhouette standing perfectly still at the edge of the light, just watching. In my dreams, sometimes I keep running toward it instead of away. I always wake up before I reach it, my heart pounding. I know how this sounds. I know most people reading this will think I'm making it up, or that we saw a bear standing on its hind legs, or some guy in a costume playing a prank. But I know what I saw. Jake knows what he saw. Something was in those woods that spring evening in '97, something that shouldn't exist according to science, but was standing there plain as day, watching 2 kids with their harmonicas. And the scariest part? I think it's still out there somewhere. Story 17. I've been debating whether to post this for a long time. It happened back in late October of 2014, and I still get chills thinking about it. I'm not the type to make up stories or exaggerate. Ask anyone who knows me. I'm actually pretty skeptical about most things. But what I saw that day in the woods near Deadwood, Oregon, well, I can't explain it any other way. I'd been hunting black-tailed deer in that area for years. It's hilly terrain with lots of timber, thick ferns, and old logging roads cutting through. Perfect deer country. That morning I'd gotten to my spot before dawn, climbed up into my portable stand about 15 feet up a sturdy Douglas fir, and settled in for what I expected to be a normal day of hunting. The first few hours were quiet, just the usual forest sounds, birds, squirrels, the occasional distant crash of a branch. Around mid-morning, I caught this weird smell on the breeze. At first it was just faint, kind of like wet dog mixed with skunk. Nothing too unusual in the woods, right? Could be a coyote, maybe a bear that had gotten into something nasty. I didn't think much of it. But then the smell started getting stronger. It would drift in and out with the breeze, but each time it returned, it was more intense. After about an hour of this, it got so bad my nose was literally burning. It was this heavy, musky stench that seemed to coat the inside of my nostrils. I've been around dead animals, bear dens, all sorts of nasty stuff in the woods, but this was different. It felt, I don't know how to describe it, deliberate somehow. I finally decided I needed to check it out. Maybe there was a dead animal nearby or something was wrong. I unloaded my Remington, safety first, secured it to my pack, and climbed down from my stand. The smell was definitely coming from uphill, so I started hiking up this old elk trail that wound through the timber. I'd gone maybe a quarter mile uphill when I heard it, a solid thud in the brush about 20 yards to my right. It sounded like something heavy being dropped or thrown. My first thought was that another hunter was nearby, maybe moving around, but it was a strange sound for someone walking. Before I could process that, there was an even heavier crash to my left, maybe 30 yards away. This one sounded exactly like a rock smashing through ferns and hitting the ground. My heart started hammering. Something wasn't right. I'm not easily spooked in the woods. I've been hunting since I was 12. But suddenly every instinct was screaming that I wasn't alone, and whatever was out there wasn't a deer or normal wildlife. I quickly crouched behind a big cedar stump and loaded my rifle. I wasn't planning to shoot, but I wanted protection. I raised my scope and started scanning the hillside, moving slowly from right to left. Nothing obvious stood out at first, just the usual mix of firs, ferns, and underbrush. Then something hit the ground about 5 feet from me, close enough that dirt actually sprayed up and hit my pant leg. It was a stone, about the size of a baseball, just sitting there. There was no way it had fallen naturally. My hands were shaking as I raised my scope again. That's when I saw movement between two massive firs about 50 yards uphill. At first I thought my eyes were playing tricks on me because what I was seeing didn't make sense. Behind some ferns and low-hanging branches was something standing on two legs. I adjusted my scope to get a better look, and that's when I saw it clearly. I can't believe I'm even typing this, but there's no other way to describe it. It was a Sasquatch. I know how that sounds. Trust me, I know. If someone had told me this story, I'd have laughed them out of the room, but I know what I saw. It was tall. I'd estimate at least 7 feet, maybe taller. It had dark brown hair, almost black, covering its entire body. The hair looked rough and dirty, not smooth like a bear's. Its shoulders were incredibly wide, easily twice the width of mine, and I'm not a small guy. Its arms hung lower than a human's would, reaching almost to its knees. The thing that really got me was its head. It was large, but elongated from forehead to chin in a way that's hard to describe. Not quite like an ape, not quite like a human. The face was mostly hidden in shadow, but I could make out small eyes that caught some of the filtered sunlight. They looked aware. That's the only word I can think of. Not animal eyes. Something else. We just stood there, frozen. Me behind my stump, it partially hidden by the forest. I could see its chest moving with steady breaths. It wasn't afraid of me. If anything, it seemed curious, maybe even annoyed that I was there. After what felt like forever, but was probably only 20 or 30 seconds, it shifted its weight and pushed a sapling aside with one massive hand. The casual strength in that movement terrified me. It stepped sideways, moving deeper behind more brush, but never taking those eyes off me. I knew I needed to get out of there. I started backing down the trail, keeping my rifle ready, but not aimed directly at it. Every survival instinct told me not to turn my back. I didn't run. That felt dangerous, like it might trigger something, but I moved as quickly as I could while still facing uphill. It took me maybe 15 minutes to get back to where my stand was, though it felt like hours. My legs were shaking so badly by the time I got there that I had to sit down. The smell was still in the air, but fainter now. My hunting buddies, Mike and Jim, were about a half-mile away. We'd planned to meet back at the trucks around noon, so I packed up my gear and headed there early. When they showed up, they could tell something was wrong. I was pale, jittery. "See a ghost up there, Trev?" Mike joked. I almost told them everything. But as I opened my mouth, I realized I couldn't. These were guys I'd known for years, serious hunters who dealt in facts and evidence. How could I tell them I'd just seen a Sasquatch, that I'd been throwing rocks at each other with a creature that wasn't supposed to exist? "Just got a weird vibe," I said instead. "Think I'm coming down with something." We packed up and left. I drove home in a daze, replaying what I'd seen over and over. Was it possible I'd mistaken a bear? No, I've seen plenty of bears. This was on 2 legs the entire time, with proportions nothing like a bear. A person in a suit, in the middle of hunting season, in remote woods? No way. For weeks afterward, I had trouble sleeping. I'd close my eyes and see those eyes watching me through the trees. I'd wake up convinced I could smell that stench in my bedroom. About 3 weeks later, curiosity got the better of me. I convinced my cousin Matt to go hiking with me, not hunting, just hiking, back to that same area. I didn't tell him why, just said I wanted to check out a spot for the late season. We reached the ridge where it happened, and I found the cedar stump I'd hidden behind. The ground around it was disturbed, soil turned up in a way that seemed deliberate. And there, in a muddy patch nearby, was what looked like a footprint. It was mostly collapsed and filled with water, but the outline was clear enough. It was wider and longer than my size 11 boot by a considerable margin. Matt saw me staring at it. "Big elk?" he asked. "Yeah," I said. "Probably. I've hunted other spots near Deadwood since then. Good spots with plenty of deer, but I haven't been back to that particular ridge. Something about that day fundamentally changed how I see the woods. The feeling of being watched, of not being at the top of the food chain. It sticks with you." I don't tell this story to many people. My wife knows something happened, but not the details. It's not the kind of thing you can just drop into conversation without people thinking you're crazy or lying. But I know what I saw, and sometimes, when the wind is right and I'm deep in the timber, I catch a whiff of that smell. When that happens, I pack up and leave. Immediately. Some things in this world aren't meant to be understood or pursued. Some territories aren't ours to claim. I still hunt. I still love the woods, but now I know they don't belong to us. We're just visitors there, and sometimes we're not welcome.